She asked a stranger to pretend to be her husband for one night. He was quiet, tired-eyed, and smelled like pine and cold air. And he said yes. What she didn't know was that this silent man sitting across from her judgmental family, fielding questions about their fake marriage with impossible calm, was worth more money than she'd ever seen in her entire life. What he didn't know was that this desperate, shivering woman was about to crack open a heart he'd spent 4 years sealing shut with concrete and grief. This is their story. Watch until the end, because nothing about it goes the way either of them planned. And if you're already in, drop a like and comment the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The snow started around 4 in the afternoon. By the time Sophie Bennett's ancient Subaru limped into the parking lot of Archer's Diner on the edge of Mill Haven, Colorado, the flakes had turned serious, thick and sideways, the kind that didn't care about your windshield wipers or your plans or the fact that you were already 40 minutes late and your phone battery was at 6%. She sat in the car for a moment with the engine off, the heater clicking as it cooled, and stared at the diner's neon sign buzzing orange through the snow. Open. She really needed a cup of coffee. She also really needed to not go inside, because going inside meant sitting somewhere warm and quiet. And sitting somewhere warm and quiet meant she would have time to think about what was waiting for her at her mother's house in 2 hours. And thinking about that was something Sophie had been actively, professionally avoiding for the past 72 hours. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it without picking it up. Her mother's name on the screen. Mom. She let it ring. The voicemail came through 20 seconds later, and Sophie didn't listen to it because she already knew what it said. She'd known since Sunday, when her mother had called to confirm that the whole family would be at dinner Friday night, which was tonight, and that everyone was so excited to finally meet Marcus. Marcus. Sophie closed her eyes. Marcus didn't exist. He had never existed. He was a name she'd invented 2 years ago during a particularly brutal Thanksgiving when her Aunt Patrice had cornered her in the kitchen and asked, with the particular cruelty that family members dress up as concern, whether Sophie was ever going to find someone, or if she was just going to keep floating around from job to job and city to city like a leaf that couldn't figure out which drain to circle. And something had broken loose in Sophie that night, some small, exhausted, humiliated piece of her. And before she could stop herself, she'd said, "Actually, I'm seeing someone. We've been together almost a year. His name is Marcus." The relief on her mother's face had been so immediate, so genuine, that Sophie hadn't been able to take it back. She'd built the lie one brick at a time after that. Marcus was an architect. He was from Denver. He was kind and steady, and he loved her. And he was real in every way that mattered to her family, which was mostly that he existed and could be reported on at holidays. She had told herself she'd come clean eventually, when she had her life more together, when she had something real to replace the lie with, when it didn't hurt so much to be the one daughter who still couldn't quite get it right. Instead, 2 years had passed, and Marcus had grown more elaborate, and she had grown more cornered, and 6 weeks ago her mother had called to say that since Sophie and Marcus were apparently getting serious, because Sophie had made the catastrophic mistake of mentioning once that they'd talked about moving in together, the family wanted to meet him before the holidays. "Just dinner," her mother had said. "Casual. We just want to put a face to the name, honey. You know how your father gets when he feels left out." Sophie had said, "Of course. I'll ask him." Then she had hung up and sat on the floor of her apartment for 20 minutes. She'd spent the next 6 weeks trying to figure out how to get out of it. She'd thought about having Marcus break up with her. She'd thought about having Marcus get sick. Nothing serious, just sick enough to cancel. She'd thought about coming clean, just walking into that dinner alone and saying, "Mom, there is no Marcus. There has never been a Marcus. I lied. I'm sorry. I don't know why I did it, except that I couldn't stand the look on your face when you look at me." She couldn't do it. She genuinely, physically could not make herself do it. So here she was, 2 hours from her mother's house, sitting in a parking lot in a snowstorm with a dead phone and a fake husband and absolutely no plan. She got out of the car. The diner was warm and smelled like bacon grease and old coffee, which under normal circumstances would have been comforting. Sophie unwound her scarf and found a booth near the window, the vinyl seat cracked and patched with electrical tape, and she ordered coffee and a piece of apple pie she couldn't afford because it was that kind of night. The place was quiet. Wednesday evening in a small mountain town in early December. There were maybe 8 other people in the whole diner. A couple of locals at the counter, a family with 2 kids who'd clearly been in the car too long, a man in a booth near the back wall, alone, with a cup of coffee and a laptop, and the specific posture of someone who was working because work was easier than whatever else they'd be doing. Sophie didn't pay attention to him. She was too busy staring at her reflection in the window, watching the snow pile up on her car, and trying to figure out what a person was supposed to do when they'd lied their way into a corner this tight. She could cancel. She could call her mother right now, if her phone wasn't dead, and say something had come up. Marcus got called away for work. She'd reschedule. But she'd already rescheduled twice. Her mother had booked a caterer. Her Aunt Patrice was driving in from Glenwood Springs. Sophie pressed the heels of her hands into her eyes and breathed out slowly. The waitress came and refilled her coffee without being asked, which Sophie took as the universe's one small act of charity for the evening. "You okay, honey?" Sophie lowered her hands. The waitress was somewhere around 60, with reading glasses pushed up on her head, and the efficient kindness of someone who'd seen a lot of people fall apart in this particular booth. "I need a husband," Sophie said. It came out before she'd decided to say it. She heard herself say it and couldn't believe she'd said it, and the waitress raised one eyebrow. "Tonight specifically, or for dinner. 2 hours from now. My family thinks I'm married, and I'm not, and I've been lying for 2 years, and I can't—" Sophie stopped, pressed her lips together. "I'm sorry. I don't know why I said that to you. I'm fine." The waitress looked at her for a moment. "Pie's on the house," she said, and walked away. Sophie slumped back against the booth. Behind her, quietly, a man said, "How married do you need him to be?" She turned around. The man from the booth near the back had apparently moved, or maybe she'd been so in her own head she hadn't noticed him 2 tables away, and he was looking at her over the rim of his coffee cup with an expression that wasn't quite amused and wasn't quite serious, just attentive, like someone listening to a problem they were actually trying to understand. He was around her age, maybe a few years older, dark hair that needed a cut, jaw that needed a shave, a flannel shirt that had been good quality once but had been worn enough times that it had gone soft. Tired eyes, not the tired of someone who hadn't slept, but the tired of someone who'd been carrying something heavy for a long time and had gotten used to the weight. He did not look like a husband. He looked like a man who'd gotten very good at being alone. Sophie stared at him. "I'm sorry," she said. "Did you just—" "I wasn't eavesdropping." He set the coffee cup down. "Small diner." "Right." She turned back around, picked up her fork, put it back down. "It was a private conversation." "You said it to a stranger." "I was having a moment." "Yeah." A pause. "I could tell." Sophie turned around again. She wasn't sure why. Maybe because his voice was low and steady in a way that didn't have any judgment in it. He wasn't laughing at her. He wasn't performing sympathy. He was just sitting there with his coffee like the whole situation was completely ordinary. "You're serious," she said. "I don't know yet." He tilted his head slightly. "What exactly are we talking about? 1 dinner?" "1 dinner. 2, maybe 2.5 hours. My family is—" She stopped. Tried to figure out how to explain her family in a way that was honest without being humiliating. "They have a lot of opinions about my life. And 2 years ago I told them I had a husband because I needed them to stop having those opinions for 5 minutes, and now they want to meet him. And you're asking a stranger in a diner to play the part." When he said it out loud, it sounded insane. It was insane. Sophie knew that. "I'm not actually asking," she said. "I was having a breakdown and I said something stupid to a waitress. You don't have to do anything." He was quiet for a moment. She couldn't read his face. He had the kind of face that had learned not to give things away. "What's his name?" he asked. "Marcus," Sophie said. "He's an architect." "Okay." "He's from Denver." "What firm?" She blinked. "What?" "If I'm an architect from Denver, someone's going to ask what firm." He wasn't being combative. He was being practical, which was somehow more disorienting. "Does Marcus have a last name?" Sophie felt something strange happening, some combination of desperate hope and complete disbelief. You're actually considering this. I'm asking questions. He picked up his coffee again. There's a difference. Why? She said. You don't know me. I could be. She didn't even know how to finish that sentence. She wasn't anything dangerous. She was just a 30-year-old woman with a dead phone and a fake marriage and a piece of apple pie she couldn't finish. He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes. She couldn't name it. Something like recognition. Like he knew what it felt like to be exactly this tired. What's your name? He asked. Sophie. Sophie Bennett. He nodded once. Damien Cross. He said it like a name and nothing more. No, you might have heard of me, or maybe you've seen my name in the news. Just a name given the way you give someone a name when you want them to know it and nothing else. Sophie didn't recognize it. She wouldn't have recognized it if he'd announced it over a loudspeaker. She hadn't been paying attention to the business world, or any world that didn't involve her 3 jobs and her credit card debt and the slow-motion disaster of her personal life. Okay, she said slowly. And you're willing to help with this? I'm willing to have dinner with your family, he said. What happens after that depends on what your family is like. Sophie laughed, a short, slightly hysterical sound. That's ominous. Is it? He picked up his laptop and began closing it with the unhurried movements of someone who'd already made a decision and didn't need to perform the making of it. Or is it honest? She looked at him for a moment. This man she didn't know. This tired, quiet stranger who'd overheard her worst moment of the year and responded to it not with pity or ridicule, but with, what firm? We have to get our story straight, she said. He pulled on his jacket. We've got 2 hours. They sat in the booth together for 90 minutes. Sophie ordered a second cup of coffee she didn't need and told him everything. The original lie, how it had grown, what her family knew about Marcus, what questions she was most afraid of. She talked faster than she usually did, which was already faster than most people were comfortable with, and she kept expecting him to look overwhelmed or impatient. He didn't. He listened with the specific, complete attention of someone who'd learned that most problems got worse when you half listened to them, and he asked questions that cut straight to what mattered. What does your mother care most about? What's your father going to want to know? Is there anyone there who's actually going to try to catch you in something? That last question made Sophie hesitate. My ex might be there, she said. Damien's expression didn't change. Might be? Or is? Is. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. Ethan Cole. He and my mother, they got along really well when we were dating. I think she might still be in contact with him. And when she planned this dinner, I think she might have invited him. She tends to do things without telling me and then act like she told me. And he knows about Marcus? He knows I'm supposedly married. He doesn't know Marcus is fake. She paused. He's going to be a problem. What kind of problem? Sophie thought about how to answer that. Ethan Cole was handsome and successful and had a smile that could light up a room and a personality that could poison it. He had never been overtly unkind to her. He'd never raised his voice or called her names. He'd done something subtler and more lasting than that. He'd made her feel, over the course of their 2-year relationship, that she was someone being generously tolerated, that his presence in her life was a gift she should be grateful for, that her opinions and instincts and choices were mostly wrong, and that the kindest thing she could do for herself was to defer to his better judgment. It had taken her a long time to understand that this was cruelty, that cruelty didn't always come with raised voices. He's the kind of problem, she said carefully, who's going to spend the whole evening trying to make Marcus look small. Damien nodded, just nodded. No, what a jerk, or don't worry about him. Just absorbed the information and filed it somewhere. What do you want from tonight? He asked. Sophie frowned. What do you mean? I mean, what does a good outcome look like? What do you actually want to walk out of there with? Nobody had ever asked her that before. The question sat in front of her like something she'd never been given the tools to answer, and she had to think about it for a moment. Really think, past the performance of, I just don't want to be humiliated, into something more specific. I want my mother to look at me like she did when I told her about Marcus, Sophie said finally. Like I'm someone who has her life together, like she doesn't need to worry about me. She paused. I know that's... That's not weird, Damien said quietly. That's just wanting your mother to see you. Something about the way he said it, matter of fact, no softness layered on top, made it land harder than comfort would have. Sophie looked at him. Do you have kids? She asked. She didn't know why she asked it, something in how he'd said mother. He was quiet for a beat. A daughter, she's 6. What's her name? Lily. Is she… Sophie started to ask, is she with you, and then saw something shift in his expression, something that closed briefly like a window before he could help it, and she changed course without thinking. Is she the reason you're in Millhaven? We live here. He looked at his coffee cup. We've been here about 3 years. She let it sit. She'd learned from 1,000 bad conversations that some silences were better left alone, and this one had a shape to it she didn't want to push against. You don't have to come tonight, she said instead. I mean that. It was a crazy thing to ask. You could just… I said I would. You asked questions. That's not the same as… Sophie… He looked at her steadily. I said I would. She stopped. There was something in his voice. Not authority, exactly, but certainty. The particular certainty of a person who had learned to mean what they said because at some point in their life they'd had to figure out which things were worth saying. Okay, she said. Okay. He looked at his watch. We should go. What's the address? Her mother's house in Millhaven was a large colonial on Birchwood Lane with a circular driveway that always had too many cars in it, a front door wreath that got changed with each season, and interior lighting designed to make everything look warmer and more perfect than it actually was. Sophie had grown up in this house. She knew where every floorboard creaked and which drawer in the kitchen stuck, and exactly how to arrange her face when she walked in so that her mother couldn't immediately tell something was wrong. She was arranging her face now, standing on the front porch in the snow, her fingers curled around her phone, now at 4% after borrowing Damien's charger in the car, and breathing the kind of slow breath you breathe when you're about to do something that can't be undone. Damien stood beside her. He'd changed in the car. She hadn't realized he had a bag until he pulled one from the back seat, and he was wearing a dark shirt now, collar open, with a jacket over it that was simple and well cut without being conspicuous. He'd fixed his hair, or at least run a hand through it. He looked like a man who was used to showing up to things. Ready? He asked. No, she said honestly. That's fine. He reached past her and rang the doorbell. Sophie had exactly 2 seconds to panic before the door opened. Her mother appeared in the doorway in a cream blouse and her good earrings, which told Sophie that this dinner was more formal than casual, in a way she should have anticipated. Margaret Bennett was 62 and beautiful in the specific way of women who had worked at it all their lives, carefully maintained, carefully presented, with a smile that was genuinely warm and genuinely strategic in equal measure. She looked at Damien. The smile widened, not artificially, genuinely. Marcus, she said, and the name hit Sophie like a small electric shock. We are so happy you're finally here. I'm Margaret. Damien took her mother's hand. Thank you for having me, Margaret. I've heard a lot about you. His voice was warm. Not performed warm. Actually warm, the way you'd speak to someone's mother if you were a person who understood what mothers meant to people. Sophie stared at the side of his face. Come in, come in. It's freezing. Her mother ushered them inside, taking their coats with the efficiency of someone who'd been waiting for this moment for 2 years. Everyone's in the living room. Sophie, your aunt is already asking questions, so prepare yourself. Sophie smiled tightly. Great. The entry hall smelled like pine and pot roast and the particular holiday candle her mother had burned in December for Sophie's entire life. Under different circumstances, it would have felt like home. Under these circumstances, it felt like walking into a theater where she'd forgotten all her lines. Damien touched her elbow, brief and light, just enough to be grounding, and she straightened and walked through the arch into the living room. The living room held 6 people, which was 2 more than Sophie had expected. Her father, Robert, solid and quiet, a retired civil engineer who expressed love by fixing things, was in the armchair by the window. Her Aunt Patrice, her mother's sister, was on the couch in a blazer she'd been wearing to family events since Sophie was in high school. Sophie's younger brother Daniel and his wife Kara were near the fireplace, Kara visibly pregnant with their second child, Daniel with the slightly anxious expression he always got when the whole family was in the same room. And then there was Ethan. Ethan Cole was standing near the drinks cabinet with a glass of wine and the practiced ease of a man who was comfortable in rooms that didn't belong to him. He was 34, brown-haired, classically handsome in a way that photographed well, wearing a jacket that cost more than Sophie made in a week at her first job. He saw her come in and his smile did the thing it always did. Engaging, inclusive, with just the smallest trace of satisfaction underneath, like a man who enjoyed having a better seat than you. His eyes moved to Damien. Something shifted in them. Quick, almost imperceptible. He'd been expecting Marcus to be less. Sophie felt it before she could think it. The slight recalibration in Ethan's posture. He'd been prepared for a certain type of man, the kind Sophie would have ended up with in Ethan's assessment. And Damien was not that kind. Damien didn't notice, or if he noticed, it didn't touch him. He moved through the room the way he moved through everything, unhurriedly, without performing anything. He shook her father's hand and asked him something about the house that made Robert's face change in the way it did when someone asked him a question he actually wanted to answer. He spoke to Aunt Patrice in a way that was respectful without being deferential, which was exactly the right register for Aunt Patrice. He congratulated Kara on the pregnancy and asked how she was feeling, and the question came out genuine enough that Kara, who had a radar for false sincerity, visibly relaxed. Sophie watched all of this from just inside the doorway, slightly stunned. "Sophie," Ethan appeared at her side with the smooth inevitability of a man who'd practiced making entrances feel casual. "You look good." "Thank you," she said flatly. "I hope you don't mind that Margaret invited me. I was in town, and she thought—" "I don't mind," Sophie said, which was a lie so practiced it came out sounding true. Ethan's eyes tracked back to Damien. "He's not what I pictured," he said, voice low and conversational, like they were old friends discussing something benign. "What did you picture?" A small smile. "I don't know. You always seem drawn to a certain type." Sophie looked at him. "What type is that?" The smile held. "People who need things from you." She turned away before she could say anything she'd regret, and went to stand next to Damien, who had apparently gotten her father talking about foundation drainage, which was the surest sign she'd ever seen that Damien Cross was paying attention to things other people overlooked. Her mother had made pot roast, roasted potatoes, green beans with almonds, and a cranberry salad that Sophie knew from experience was technically a dessert dressed as a salad. They sat around the dining room table, 8 of them, which was 2 more than the table was designed for, making everything slightly too close and slightly too warm, and therefore slightly more honest than these dinners usually were. Sophie sat next to Damien. He'd found his way to the chair on her right without being directed, which she thought was deliberate, and his shoulder was close enough to hers that when he turned to answer a question, she could feel the shift of it. The question started with her mother, which was traditional. "So, Marcus, Sophie tells us you're an architect. What kind of work do you do?" Damien had asked Sophie about this in the car. She told him what she'd told her family. Marcus worked on residential design, high-end renovations, some commercial projects. Damien had nodded and said, "Okay," and then proceeded to clearly know things about architecture that she had not given him, which she'd noticed then and was noticing now as he answered her mother's question with the kind of specific, fluent detail that didn't come from a 60-minute crash course. "Mostly adaptive reuse lately," he said, "taking older industrial spaces and converting them for residential or mixed use. It's slower work, but it matters more in the long run, I think. You're working within constraints that force you to be creative rather than just building from scratch." Her mother looked genuinely interested. Her father looked more than genuinely interested. He looked like a man who'd found someone worth talking to. "The old Whitmore Mill," her father said, "out on Route 9. You know it? Been sitting empty for 20 years. Structure's still sound, though." "I've seen it," Damien said, and then he said something specific about the mill's brick pattern and its roof pitch that made Sophie's father put down his fork and lean forward. Sophie ate her pot roast and tried to keep breathing. Aunt Patrice waited until there was a pause and then deployed the question she'd clearly been holding in reserve. "And how did you two meet? Sophie was always so vague about the details." Sophie opened her mouth. "Broke down car," Damien said. She closed her mouth. "About 2.5 years ago," he continued, "I was driving back from a job site. and she was on the side of Route 6 with a flat tire and a jack that didn't fit her car. He glanced at Sophie with an expression so natural she almost believed it herself. She was handling it, but it was raining. I was not handling it, Sophie said, which was the first true thing she'd said in 5 minutes. You were handling it in the sense that you weren't panicking, Damien said. Which I respected. Aunt Patrice beamed. That's exactly the kind of story I like. None of this app nonsense. We met on an app, Daniel said. Yes, well, said Aunt Patrice. Kara caught Sophie's eye across the table and made a face that meant your aunt is a lot. Sophie made a face back that meant, I know, I grew up with her. The dinner continued. Sophie had expected it to be grueling, and parts of it were. There were moments when a question came that she hadn't prepared for, and she felt the floor tilt under her. But each time, Damien answered in a way that was true enough that it didn't feel like lying, and specific enough that it didn't invite follow-up, and she began to understand that he wasn't performing a character. He was just being himself and applying the name Marcus like a layer of paint over something that was already real. It was working, possibly too well. Her mother had that look, the particular softening around her eyes that meant she was revising her assessment of a situation in real time. Her father was on his second glass of wine, which only happened when he was genuinely comfortable. Even Daniel had relaxed, which meant Ethan had been quiet for too long. So, Marcus, Ethan's voice came from the other end of the table, easy and conversational. He'd been waiting for the right moment. He'd found it. Denver's a good market for your kind of work right now. Who are you with? Which firm? It was exactly what Sophie had been afraid of. Damien set down his fork. Not hurriedly, not with any change in expression. He took the half second that the question gave him the way someone takes a step, smoothly, without drama. I'm independent now, he said. Had a partnership for a while that ran its course. These days I work direct with clients, which suits me better. Less overhead, more control. It was the answer they'd discussed. Sophie had suggested it. She'd thought it was their weakest point. Ethan tilted his head, smile in place. What kind of clients are we talking? Because the independent market at that level is pretty competitive. It is, Damien agreed. Ethan waited for more. Damien didn't offer any. Just curious, Ethan said after a beat that was slightly too long. Sophie never mentioned much about what you did specifically. I assumed. You assumed what? Sophie said. The table went briefly still. Sophie hadn't intended to say it that way. Direct and quiet, with an edge she usually kept wrapped up at family dinners. But she was tired, and Ethan's, I assumed, had landed on something she didn't want landing on. Ethan's smile didn't waver. I assumed she'd have mentioned the specifics, you two having been together this long. We don't spend a lot of time talking about work, Damien said pleasantly. What do you spend time talking about? It came out like a question, but it had the shape of a challenge. Our daughter. The table went still again, but differently. Sophie froze. Nobody at this table knew about a daughter. Marcus didn't have a daughter. She'd never given Marcus a daughter because that had seemed like too many details to maintain. Damien had a daughter. He was talking about Lily. She felt him shift slightly beside her. Not flinching, just acknowledging with the smallest possible movement that he'd gone somewhere unrehearsed and he knew it. Her mother's eyes lit up. You have a child? Sophie, you never mentioned She's mine, Damien said before Sophie could speak. From before Sophie and I met. She's 6. Her name's Lily. He paused. Sophie's been the best thing that's happened to both of us. He said it quietly, with the particular weight of something that wasn't entirely a lie, even though it didn't make logical sense because they'd known each other for 3 hours. Sophie's mother looked at her with an expression Sophie hadn't seen directed at her in a very long time. Pride. Just uncomplicated, clear-eyed pride. Sophie felt something sting in the back of her throat and looked down at her plate. Across the table, Ethan set down his wine glass. He'd recalculated again. She could see it in the set of his jaw, the particular stillness of a person who'd come somewhere expecting one thing and found something they didn't know how to account for. The meal ended. Her mother served a lemon tart. Sophie helped clear plates with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been clearing plates in this kitchen since she was old enough to carry one. And at some point, she found herself standing at the sink with a dishcloth in her hands and realized that her hands were shaking. Not badly. Just a small, fine tremor that she recognized as the body catching up to what the mind had been through for the past 2 hours. Here! Her brother Daniel appeared beside her with a stack of plates. He was 2 years younger than Sophie, and had always been the easier child. Not because he was better, but because he'd found the life their mother imagined for him and climbed inside it without too much friction. He was happy, genuinely, and Sophie didn't hold that against him. She just sometimes stood next to his happiness and felt the specific ache of someone who'd been issued the wrong instructions for their own life. "He's good," Daniel said quietly, looking through the pass-through to where Damien was talking with their father again. "Yeah," Sophie said. "Like, genuinely good." Daniel looked at her. "You seem surprised." "I'm not surprised." "Sophie," his voice dropped, "you look like you've been holding your breath for 2 hours." She looked at her brother. Daniel had always been the only person in her family who could actually see her. Not the version she performed, but the person underneath the performance. It had been both a comfort and a liability over the years. "I'm fine," she said. "Is he treating you okay?" The question landed softly, but it had weight. Sophie thought about Damien in that diner, asking, "What do you actually want to walk out of there with?" She thought about his hand on her elbow at the door, just enough to be grounding. She thought about, "She's been the best thing that's happened to both of us," and the way he'd said it. Not to perform for the room, but to give her something. "Yeah," she said. "He treats me okay." Daniel nodded. "Good." He put the plates down and looked at her for a second longer. "You've been running from something for a while, Soph. I don't know what it is, but whoever this guy is, he doesn't seem like running." She didn't know what to say to that, so she handed him a dish towel. They left around 9:30. Her mother hugged Damien at the door with the warmth of someone who had decided to love him, and shook his hand and then hugged Sophie for several seconds longer than usual and said into her shoulder quietly, "He's wonderful. You've done well." Sophie said, "Thanks, Mom." She did not cry until they were in the car. Not ugly crying, just the silent kind, the kind that comes after a particular sustained effort, the pressure releasing through the only valve it could find. She turned toward the window so he wouldn't see it and pressed her knuckles against her mouth. Damien drove in silence for about 3 minutes, then, "You don't have to do that." "Do what?" "Hide it." Sophie made a sound that was meant to be a laugh and came out as something less controlled. "I'm fine. I just—" She stopped. Tried again. "My mother said I did well. Do you know how long it's been since my mother said I did anything well?" He didn't answer. She didn't expect him to. "It wasn't even real," she said. "None of it was real, and I still needed it that much." She exhaled. "That's pathetic." "No," Damien said. He said it the way he said most things, flatly, without decoration. "It's just human." The snow had stopped. The road back through Millhaven was dark and clean, streetlights catching the fresh white and pools of yellow, and Sophie sat in the passenger seat of a stranger's car and let herself not talk for a minute. "Your daughter," she said eventually. He was quiet for a moment. "Yeah." "She's at home?" "With my neighbor, Mrs. Paulson. She watches her sometimes." "You didn't—" Sophie hesitated. "You left your daughter with a neighbor to come to a dinner for someone you don't know." "I didn't plan on that being the night," he said. "I was at the diner waiting for weather to clear. I could have left earlier." A beat. "I didn't." Sophie thought about that. "Why?" she asked. He was quiet long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. "I haven't done anything for someone else's sake in a while," he said finally. "Not—" He stopped, started again more carefully. "I spend a lot of time taking care of Lily. I spend a lot of time running the company. I go to work and I come home and I'm careful and I'm steady and I'm—" He exhaled through his nose. "I don't really do things that don't have a plan behind them anymore. And this didn't have a plan." "No." Sophie looked at him. "What happened? Before—" "With Lily's mother. You don't have to tell me," she added quickly. "Her name was Claire," he said, after a moment like he was deciding how much to give. "She died 4 years ago. Heart thing. Congenital. She knew about it. We both knew. Always." We just kept thinking there was more time than there was. Sophie didn't say anything. There was nothing to say to that. She just let it be what it was. Lily was 2, he said. She doesn't remember her, or she says she doesn't. She has one memory, I think, at just Claire's voice, reading to her. She asks me sometimes what she sounded like. Sophie looked out the window. The night was very still. What do you tell her? I play her voicemail, he said simply. Claire used to leave these long, meandering messages that I always thought were not annoying, but long. I have 47 of them. I never deleted them. He paused. Turns out that was the right call. Sophie felt something catch in her chest. The specific ache of being handed something real by someone you don't know, with no preamble or warning, just the raw truth of it, offered because the moment called for it, and he was the kind of person who answered when moments called. I'm sorry, she said. I'm really, genuinely sorry. Yeah. He pulled up in front of the diner, where her car sat alone in the parking lot under a fresh inch of snow. He put the car in park and they sat there for a moment. Thank you, Sophie said, for tonight. I know it was fine. You were better than fine. She turned to look at him. I don't know what you were, but my mother looked at me like I was someone worth looking at, and that hasn't happened in a long time. He met her eyes. His were dark and tired and quiet, and there was something in them that was too careful to be called anything yet, but was pointed in a direction she could feel. You always were, he said. Not a performance, not a line, just a thing he was saying because it was true, and because she needed to hear it. Sophie looked at him for one more second, then she said, I don't know how to thank you for this. You already did, he said, twice. Can I? She hesitated. Can I give you my number? Not for anything weird, She felt herself getting flustered and stopped. I'd like to know how Lily is doing, with her memory. Something shifted in his face, brief and unguarded. The window opening just slightly before the habit of caution could close it. Okay, he said. She punched her number into his phone, the screen bright in the dark car. She handed it back. Their fingers didn't touch, but it was close. Drive carefully, he said. You too. She pushed the door open into the cold. The snow was done and the air tasted clean. She turned back once. Damien. He looked at her. She's lucky, Sophie said. Lily, to have someone who kept the voicemails. She closed the door before she could see his expression. She swept the snow off her windshield in long strokes and climbed in and sat for a moment in the dark before starting the engine. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. She's lucky to have someone say that. Sophie stared at it for a long moment. She put the car in reverse. She was still thinking about it 20 minutes later when she pulled into her apartment complex, and she was still thinking about it when she unlocked her door and sat on the floor in her coat for a minute. Not thinking, just existing in the strange and specific warmth of a night that had no right to feel the way it felt. She'd gone looking for a husband. She'd found something she didn't have a name for yet. But it was the first thing in a long time that felt, underneath all its complications and impossibilities, and the plain fact that they were strangers who'd known each other for 4 hours, like it might be worth the trouble of finding out. He didn't text again that night. Sophie told herself she wasn't waiting for him to. She made tea she didn't drink and scrolled through her phone without looking at anything and went to bed at 11:30 and lay in the dark staring at the ceiling with the specific wakefulness of someone whose body hadn't gotten the message that the crisis was over. The crisis wasn't over technically. She'd bought herself one dinner's worth of breathing room. Her family had met Marcus and liked him, which meant the next question was when they'd see him again, which meant the lie hadn't ended. It had just upgraded itself to a more complicated and expensive model. She knew this. She'd known it the moment her mother had hugged Damien at the door. She thought about it for about 40 minutes and then stopped thinking about it, because there was a limit to how much a person could productively catastrophize at midnight, and she'd hit it. She thought instead about what Daniel had said at the sink. Whoever this guy is, he doesn't seem like running. Her brother had a way of saying true things in the simplest possible language, which was either a gift or an irritant, depending on how much you wanted to be seen at any given moment. She fell asleep sometime around 1. Her phone buzzed at 7:15 the next morning with a text from her mother. Marcus is wonderful. Your father asked about him this morning. First thing, you know how rarely that happens. Sophie read it twice, set the phone face down on the mattress, picked it back up and read it again. Then she got up and made coffee and stood at her kitchen window watching the street below, where the snow from last night had been compressed into gray slush by morning traffic, and tried to figure out what she was feeling. It wasn't guilt exactly, or it was guilt, but it was layered over something else, something warmer and more disquieting, the particular feeling of having been given something you know you don't entirely deserve and wanting it anyway. But he called 4 days later. Not a text, an actual call, which surprised her because he didn't seem like a person who called when he could text. She was at her second job, waiting tables at the Millhaven Grill during the Friday lunch rush, and she saw his name on her screen. She'd saved him as Damian Cross, Marcus, which in retrospect felt ridiculous. And she felt her pulse do something embarrassing. She let it go to voicemail. She was carrying 3 plates. She listened to it on her break, standing in the alley behind the kitchen where the line cooks took smoke breaks. Hey, it's Damian. I know this is a strange thing to call about, but Lily wants to know if the wife is real. I told her I had dinner with someone last week, and she has a lot of follow-up questions. I thought you should know that exists as a situation. A pause. You don't have to call back. She's 6. She fixates on things. Another pause. Anyway, Sophie listened to it 3 times, then she called him back. He picked up on the second ring. Hey. The wife? She said. A short sound that might have been a laugh, low and brief, like it caught him off guard. Yeah, I know. What exactly did you tell her? I said I'd had dinner with someone, and it had been a long time since I'd done that, and it was fine. He sounded mildly pained. I did not anticipate the follow-up inquiry. What did she ask? She asked if you were pretty. I said yes. She asked if you were nice. I said yes. She asked if you were my wife. He paused. I said no. She asked why not. Sophie leaned against the alley wall. What did you say? I said we'd just met. And she said that Elsa and Anna in Frozen met at the beginning of the movie and were still sisters by the end, so it was enough time. He paused again. I don't entirely follow the logic, but she felt it was relevant. Sophie laughed. A real one, not the polite kind. That's honestly a strong argument. She's very strategic for 6. The warmth in his voice when he talked about his daughter was different from every other register he used. It was unguarded in a way nothing else was. I told her we were friends. Are we? The question came out before Sophie could evaluate whether it was too direct. She heard him take a breath. I think we could be, he said carefully. I'd like that, Sophie said. They were quiet for a moment, not uncomfortably. The particular quiet of 2 people who've established enough of a basis for silence to not feel like a problem. How are you? He asked. After the other night? My mother texted me that my father asked about Marcus first thing the next morning. That's a good thing. It's a complicated thing. She looked up at the gray December sky between the alley buildings. He never asks about anyone I date. He barely asked about Ethan, and Ethan has the exact personality my father always said he wanted in a son-in-law. What personality is that? Very confident, very certain about everything. Looks like he knows exactly where he's going. She paused. My dad used to say that's what made a man reliable. Just the sound, neutral, like he was turning something over. What? Nothing. Just, the most certain people I've known were certain because they decided not to look too closely at things. He left it there, not elaborating. Sophie thought about Ethan's smile, the way it never changed, not even at dinner the other night when the conversation had clearly gone differently than he'd planned. Yeah, she said. Lily wants to know your favorite color, Damian said abruptly, like he'd been waiting for a gap to deliver this information. Sophie blinked. Is this a commissioned inquiry? She made me promise to ask. She's very thorough. Yellow, Sophie said. The specific yellow of old paperback covers. Not bright yellow, aged yellow. Silence for a moment, then, she's going to need me to explain that. Tell her like a banana that's been sitting for a while. That's going to worry her about fruit. Tell her like, Sophie thought about it. Tell her like the sun when it's late in the afternoon. Another pause. She could almost hear him filing it away. Okay, she'll accept that. What's her favorite color? Changes depending on the day. Today it's silver. Yesterday it was brown, which I did not see coming. Brown is underrated. That's what she said. There was something in his voice now, not quite smiling, but adjacent to it, the particular softness of someone who doesn't smile often and therefore sounds different when they're close to it. She also wants to know if you have any pets. I have a cactus. Is that a pet? I named him Gerald. A beat. I'll tell her. They talked for 43 minutes. Sophie knew because she was supposed to be back on the floor in 15, and she clocked every minute of it and could not make herself go back inside. She found out that Damien had built his company from an initial investment he'd put together through 5 years of working construction and saving everything he didn't need. That he'd started in real estate development, moved into technology infrastructure when he saw what was coming, and then expanded into 3 adjacent industries in the following 6 years. That he had 212 employees, which he said not with pride but with the particular weight of someone who understood what 212 families depended on. She found out that he cooked breakfast every morning because Lily was suspicious of anything she hadn't personally watched being made. That he'd tried to get her into swimming lessons twice and failed both times. That she was obsessed with space and had recently informed him with complete seriousness that when she grew up she was going to live on the moon, and he'd said okay, and she'd asked if he'd visit, and he'd said every chance he got, and she'd said that was acceptable. He found out that Sophie had been working 3 jobs since moving to Millhaven 18 months ago. The diner, the grill, and a weekend shift at a gift shop on Main Street that she'd taken because it had a discount on candles. That she'd come to Millhaven from Denver after a plan that had involved both her savings and her faith in a person she should have looked at more carefully had fallen apart in the same week. That she was good at surviving things and not particularly good at asking for help, and that she'd been working on the second one with mixed results. She didn't tell him all of it, not the part about Ethan, not completely. She told him enough that he could understand the shape of it, and he listened without trying to fill in the blanks or offer a verdict on a person he'd only met once. You don't have to keep the jobs you hate, he said at one point. Which one do I hate? The gift shop. A pause. You said the word candle discount with the exact energy of someone trying to find something to be grateful for. Sophie paused. That's very perceptive. I pay attention. I've noticed. She finally went back inside 7 minutes late, and her manager gave her a look, and she said she was sorry and meant it, and didn't entirely regret it. He texted her a photo that evening. Just a piece of paper, crayon drawn in irregular shapes, mostly silver and brown, with a yellow sun in the corner. And 6-year-old writing at the top, for Sophie, Marcus's friend. Sophie stared at it for a long time. Then she texted back. Tell Lily that Gerald the cactus says hi, and also that the sun is exactly right. 3 minutes later, she wants to know if Gerald has feelings. I believe he does, but he's very private about it. She accepts this. She says she will draw him next. Sophie set her phone down on the counter and stood in her small, cluttered apartment with its water stain on the ceiling and its secondhand furniture and the stack of bills on the table she'd been avoiding, and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time and couldn't name precisely. Not happy, exactly. Or happy, but with the texture of something fragile, the kind of feeling you hold carefully because you know it could break. She went to bed at a reasonable hour for the first time in weeks. They started talking every few days. It happened without either of them deciding it was happening, the way some things accumulate. Not a plan, just a pattern, one conversation leading to another because neither of them ended the last one wanting to. He called on Sunday evenings, usually after Lily was in bed. She called on Wednesday afternoons from her car between the lunch shift and the dinner shift, when she had 40 minutes and nowhere to be. They texted about nothing. A photo she took of frost on a window. A question about the documentary she'd mentioned. A report from Lily about Gerald's presumed emotional state. It was easy in a way that made Sophie slightly suspicious of it, because nothing this easy had ever stayed easy. Her experience of connection, with her family, with Ethan, with the city of Denver and the life she'd tried to build there, was that it started with warmth and eventually revealed a floor with a drop below it. She'd learned to keep some part of herself back, a small, reserved portion that could step away cleanly when the drop appeared. She kept trying to keep that portion back with Damien. It kept not working. On a Thursday in mid-December, 2 weeks after the dinner, he said, "Lily wants to know if you'd want to have lunch with us. On Saturday, there's a place in town she likes." Sophie was quiet for a moment. "Is that—" She stopped, started again. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" "No," he said honestly. "But she's been asking for 2 weeks, and I don't have a good reason to say no." "I'm the fake wife of a person who doesn't exist," Sophie said. "That's a reason." "She doesn't know that part." "What does she know?" "That I had dinner with someone. That her name is Sophie. That her favorite color is afternoon sun, and her cactus has feelings." A pause. "She knows you drew back." Sophie blinked. "I what?" "I told her your color was aged paperback yellow. She didn't know what that was, so we looked it up." He paused. "She said it sounded like something trying to hold on." Sophie stood in her kitchen with the phone pressed to her ear and felt something move through her chest. Slow and warm and a little frightening, the sensation of a door she'd thought was sealed detecting a draft from somewhere. "Saturday," she said. "What time?" The diner Lily had chosen was called The Painted Spoon, on the corner of Mill and 4th, with a mural of cartoon breakfast foods on the outside wall and a menu that was mostly pancakes in different configurations. Sophie arrived 3 minutes early and stood outside in the cold for 90 seconds before going in because she was, inexplicably, nervous, and she wanted a moment to talk herself out of it. "She's 6, Sophie told herself. "She's a child. Children either like you or they don't, and it's not personal either way, and you are not nervous." She was absolutely nervous. She went inside. They were already in a booth by the window. Lily was wearing a silver parka that made her look like a very small astronaut, and she had her father's dark eyes and her father's quality of paying complete attention to whatever she was looking at, and what she was currently looking at was Sophie. Sophie stopped a few feet from the table. Lily looked at her for a moment with the solemn, evaluating attention of a 6-year-old who has decided to take this seriously. Then she said, "Your hair is very long." "It is," Sophie agreed. "Can you sit on it?" "Not quite. It's more of an almost." Lily considered this. "My friend Maya can sit on hers. She says it's uncomfortable, but she does it anyway." "That's dedicated." "I know." Lily slid over in the booth. "You can sit here. I saved it." Sophie slid into the booth. Damien was across from them, and he was looking at her with an expression she was learning to read. The one that happened when something surprised him, and he couldn't entirely hide it. Not smiling, but close. "Hi," he said. "Hi." "She was in the window watching for you," he said. "For about 20 minutes. Lily turned to him. "I was not watching for 20 minutes. You told me time was going slowly, because the pancakes were taking long." She looked at Sophie with great dignity. "It was not about you." Sophie pressed her lips together to keep from laughing. "I didn't assume it was." Lily seemed to accept this. She turned back to the menu with the focus of someone deciding something important, and Sophie looked across the table at Damien, and something passed between them. Brief, wordless, the shared warmth of a moment that didn't need to be commented on. Chet. The pancakes, when they arrived, were silver dollar-sized, and Lily arranged hers in a pattern before eating them, tallest to shortest, which she explained was the correct order. "Why?" Sophie asked. "Because then they get better as you go." She said it like it was obvious. "If you start with the best one, the rest are all worse." "That's actually really smart," Sophie said. Lily looked at her. "I know." Not bragging, just acknowledging a fact. Sophie liked her immediately and completely. There was something unvarnished about Lily that was both her father's and entirely her own. The directness, the internal logic that she didn't feel the need to explain unless asked. She was also, Sophie noticed, watching her carefully. Not suspiciously, just with the particular attention of a child who'd learned that new people in her father's life were worth paying attention to. At some point, Lily asked, with no preamble, "Do you like my dad?" Sophie kept her face steady. "Yes, I think he's a good person." Lily considered this. "He's very serious sometimes." I've noticed. He doesn't laugh very much. She speared a piece of pancake. He used to laugh more. I don't really remember it, but Mrs. Paulson told me. The table was quiet for a moment. Damien was looking at his coffee, and Sophie could see in the line of his jaw the particular effort of not reacting. Do you know why? Sophie asked carefully. Because of my mom, Lily said matter-of-factly. Not with sadness, or not the visible kind. The particular flat calm of a child who's known a loss their whole life and has built their landscape around it. She died when I was little. It made him different. I'm sorry, Sophie said. Lily looked at her. Did someone die that you loved? Not like that, Sophie said. But I've lost things that mattered. Lily seemed to think about whether that counted. Apparently she decided it did, because she nodded and went back to her pancakes. Damien, across the table, was looking at Sophie with an expression that was too complicated to name, layered and careful, and something underneath it that was neither careful nor comfortable, something he was working at keeping in the appropriate place. She looked back at him for 1 second. Then she reached over and cut a piece of Lily's pancake that had been giving Lily trouble. And Lily said thank you in a very small voice, and the moment passed into the next one. She stayed for 2 hours. They walked afterward, the three of them, through the Millhaven Christmas market that had appeared in the town square sometime in the past 2 weeks. Pine-strung booths selling mulled cider and hand-carved ornaments and wool scarves, everything smelling of cloves and cold air. Lily held Sophie's hand because she wanted help with a particularly icy patch of cobblestone, and then she kept holding it after the ice was past, and Sophie let her. Damien walked on Lily's other side with his hands in his pockets and his eyes scanning the market with the low-level vigilance of a person responsible for keeping something important safe. Sophie caught him watching her twice. Both times he looked away first, which she thought was significant, because he did not generally seem like a person who looked away from things. At the cider booth, Lily decided she needed hot chocolate specifically, and Damien went to get it, and Lily stood next to Sophie and looked up at the pine garlands and said, with the conversational non sequitur of a child changing tracks, "You're different than the other ones." Sophie looked down at her. "What other ones?" "The people from his work who come to dinner sometimes. The women who my grandma keeps sending pictures of." She wrinkled her nose. "They smile too much." "What do you mean?" "Like they're trying to." She made a face that demonstrated this, a stiff, wide expression. "You smile when something is funny, like a normal person." Sophie looked at this 6-year-old who had apparently been observing and cataloging her father's social landscape with more precision than most adults managed. "You pay attention to a lot of things." "My dad says that's a good quality." She paused. "He also says it means I notice everything and that I should learn to mind my business." "It is, and you should," Sophie agreed. Lily grinned. It was sudden and completely unguarded, and it looked like her father would look if he ever let himself, and Sophie felt something catch in her chest that she really genuinely needed to be careful about. Damien came back with hot chocolate for Lily and a second cider for Sophie that she hadn't asked for. He handed it over without comment, and she took it and didn't comment either. They walked the rest of the market, and Lily explained her moon colonization plan in considerable detail, which involved solar panels and a very particular greenhouse system, and also a large dog who she planned to name Rutherford. "Why Rutherford?" Sophie asked. "It's a serious name," Lily said, "for a serious dog. On the moon you need serious things." "That's ironclad logic," Sophie said. Damien made the sound that wasn't quite a laugh. She was learning to listen for it. He walked her to her car when they left. Lily was already strapped into the back seat with her hot chocolate and the small carved wooden star she'd convinced Damien to buy her, and Sophie stood on the sidewalk in front of her car with her keys in her hand. "She's incredible," Sophie said. "Yeah," he said it simply. "She is." "You should be proud. She's—" Sophie stopped, tried to say it right. "You can tell she's loved, not just taken care of, actually loved. There's a difference." Damien was quiet for a moment, looking at her with that careful, complicated expression she'd started to recognize. "She liked you," he said. "She doesn't like everyone. She told me I smile like a normal person. That's high praise." I figured. Sophie turned her keys over in her hand. I had a good time today. Good. He paused. I did too. She looked at him, at the dark eyes and the jaw that still hadn't caught up with a razor, and the particular way he stood, weight slightly forward, like he was braced for something. He was a man who'd gotten very good at absorbing things, at standing in the wind without showing how much it took. Damien, she said. Yeah. I know this whole situation is... She stopped, tried again. The reason we met is ridiculous. The way this started is ridiculous. And I know you have a lot on your life, and I'm not trying to complicate it. You're not complicating it, he said. I might be. Sophie. He said her name in the low, steady register he used when he wanted something to land. I took my daughter to the Christmas market this morning with a woman she met for the first time, and she held her hand through the whole thing and told her about Rutherford the future moondog. That is the best Saturday I've had in a long time. Sophie felt the fragile, careful, unnamed thing shift in her chest. I'll see you, she said. Yeah. A pause. You will. She got in the car. In the back seat, Lily held up the carved wooden star and showed it to Sophie through the headrest gap and said, This is for the moon house, when I build it. It'll be perfect, Sophie told her. She drove home through the midday light and did not try to name what she was feeling. She let it sit, unnamed, which was the only way to hold something this new without crushing it. Her phone buzzed at a red light. She looked at it at the next stop sign. Lily wants you to know Gerald will be welcome at the moon house. Pets are allowed. Sophie stared at the text until the car behind her honked. She drove home. She sat on her couch. She looked at the cactus on her windowsill. Gerald, in his terracotta pot with the chipped rim, stubbornly alive in his prickly, self-contained way. Don't, she told herself. She texted back. Tell her Gerald is honored. He's already started packing. She put the phone face down. She sat for a while in the quiet of her apartment, in the afternoon light coming sideways through the window, catching the dust in the air and the curve of Gerald's needles and the small, warm ache in her chest that she was going to have to start calling something soon. She'd asked a stranger for one night. He'd given her a Saturday and a Christmas market and a 6-year-old's hand in hers and a cup of cider she hadn't asked for, and the particular feeling of being seen by someone who didn't look away. She hadn't planned for any of it. She was starting to think that was the point. January came in cold and honest, the way January always did in Millhaven, stripping away the softness of the holiday lights and leaving just the mountain and the gray sky and the particular quiet of a town that had stopped performing for the season. Sophie noticed it the way she noticed most things lately, through the texture of her days with Damien in them versus the texture of her days before. Before, January would have felt like a door closing, the dead month. The month of looking at what you had and finding it insufficient. She'd always gotten through January by keeping moving. Another shift, another application, another small task to complete so she didn't have to sit still long enough to feel the weight of everything that wasn't working. This January was different, and she knew why. And she was trying very hard not to make too much of it. They had settled into a rhythm that had no official name. Not dating. They hadn't defined it, hadn't approached the conversation, had moved around it the way you move around furniture you're not sure belongs in the room yet. But he called on Sunday evenings, and she called on Wednesdays, and on the second Saturday of January, she went to his house for the first time. The house surprised her. She'd built a version of it in her head, something imposing, something that announced itself, because the number of employees and the weight with which he carried his responsibilities had started to sketch a certain picture. Instead, it was a large but plain craftsman on the edge of town, with a wide porch and a woodpile stacked along the side wall and tire tracks through the snow in the driveway. Someone had hung wind chimes by the front door that were clearly Lily's doing. They were painted in silver and brown and the afternoon sun yellow that Sophie had described over the phone 3 weeks ago. She stood on the porch and looked at them for a moment before she knocked. Lily opened the door before she could. "You're 4 minutes late," Lily said. "I know, I'm sorry." "It's okay." She stepped back to let Sophie in. "I was checking every 2 minutes. Dad said that was excessive." "He's probably right." "He's usually right," Lily agreed with the specific exasperation of someone who found this inconvenient. "Come see the kitchen. I helped with the soup. Tom, The inside of the house was the inside of a house where a man lived alone with a child. Not messy, but lived in a way that no interior designer would have endorsed. There was a drawing taped to the refrigerator, another one on the wall next to the coat hooks, a small pair of snow boots by the door, and a larger pair beside them. The furniture was good and well made, and arranged with a kind of functional logic rather than any decorative intention. There were books stacked on the coffee table with bookmarks in them at various depths of progress, and a half-assembled puzzle on the dining table pushed to one end. It looked like a real life, not a curated one. Sophie felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't known was tight. Damien came out of the kitchen with a dish towel over his shoulder, which was an image she catalogued involuntarily and filed somewhere she didn't examine too closely. He was in an old sweater and looked like he'd been standing over a stove. And he said, "Hey," in the easy way they'd built up to over weeks of phone calls, and she said, "Hey back," and it was both completely ordinary and quietly significant in the way things become when you've been building toward them without admitting it. "Lily says she helped with the soup," Sophie said. "She stirred it once and then declared her contribution complete." He went back into the kitchen. "She's a supervisor by nature." "I can hear you," Lily called from somewhere. "That was the intention," Damien called back. Sophie followed him into the kitchen. It smelled like garlic and rosemary and something that had been slow cooking for hours, the particular domestic warmth that small kitchens hold better than large ones, and she leaned against the counter while he checked something on the stove, and they talked about nothing specific. How the week had gone, something funny Lily had said at school, a situation at the grill that had involved a wrong order and a customer who took it personally. It was the most comfortable Sophie had been in a long time, and comfort, in her experience, was the thing she most needed to be careful about, because it had a way of making her forget that floors had edges. She forgot, that afternoon, to be careful. They ate soup and bread at the dining table, Lily between them, explaining at length the social dynamics of her first-grade class with the analytical rigor of someone documenting a complicated ecosystem. There was a boy named Travis who took things from people's desks without asking, which was unacceptable. There was a girl named Priya who was Lily's best friend and who had the best coloring pencils in the class and shared them without being asked, which was what a good person did. There was a teacher, Miss Abernathy, who smelled like lavender and was fair about things. Sophie listened and asked questions and ate the soup, which was genuinely very good. And at one point Lily said, "Dad never makes soup for guests," and Damien said, "I make soup all the time." And Lily said, "For guests, though," and let the silence that followed carry its own meaning with the devastating effectiveness of a 6-year-old who understood implication without having a word for it. After soup there was drawing. Lily had a project, the moon house, rendered now in considerable architectural detail across multiple sheets of paper, and she needed Sophie's input on the greenhouse section specifically because, she explained, the cactus zone needed to be thought through carefully. "Gerald is going to need a particular kind of light," Lily said seriously. "He does well in indirect sunlight," Sophie said. "On the moon there's no atmosphere to scatter it." She looked at her father. "Right?" Damien, who had apparently been briefed on this. "Direct radiation. You'd need shielding." Lily turned back to Sophie with the expression of someone whose point had just been made for them. "So we need to think about this." Sophie pulled the paper toward her and picked up a pencil. "Okay, let's think about it." They spent an hour on the greenhouse. Damien sat at the end of the table with something from work he was reading, and Sophie and Lily bent over the drawings with the focused companionship of people who were taking something seriously together. And Sophie became aware at some point that she was entirely happy, in a specific and uncomplicated way she hadn't felt in years, and that it scared her more than almost anything. She left at 7, after Lily had been persuaded to go toward bed with the understanding that Sophie would be back. Damien walked her to her car in the dark, their breath visible in the cold air, and they stood by the driver's side door in the way they'd started doing, neither of them in a hurry to end the part where they were still standing near each other. "She's going to hold you to that," he said. "Coming back." "I know." Sophie tucked her hands into her coat pockets. "I plan to." He nodded. Looking at her in the low light from the porch, snow on the ground, the wind chimes barely moving in the still air. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yeah." "When you came to dinner that night, At my mother's. She paused. You chose not to mention what you do, what your company is, what you're worth. She said it carefully because she'd been careful with it, turning it over for weeks. Why? He was quiet for a moment. Because I wanted to walk in as a person first. You've had experiences where that order got reversed. It wasn't a question. He acknowledged it with a slight shift of his shoulders. When Claire died and the company was already public, the first year was complicated. People knew what I had. They had a lot of feelings about it. Some of those feelings turned into things I didn't ask for. He paused. I learned to protect the first impression. Let it be just me, before anything else. Sophie thought about that evening, her mother's face, her father at the mill, Ethan's slight recalibration when Damien wouldn't give ground. They all know now, she said. My family. Someone looked you up. Your mother called me last week, he said. Sophie stared at him. She what? She called my office number. She wanted to make sure I knew. He stopped, a faint, complicated expression. She said she'd looked me up and was sorry if she'd treated me like a regular person. She what? Sophie's voice had gone flat. I told her she'd treated me exactly right. He said it without particular emphasis, just a fact. That being regular is the point. Sophie looked at him. You should have told me, she called. I know. I'm telling you now. Damien. She pressed her fingers to the bridge of her nose. My mother called my fake husband's actual office. She's thorough. Sophie stopped, exhaled. I'm sorry. That was so far over a line. Sophie. He said her name in the way he did when he wanted her to slow down. She called because she cares about you. She wanted to make sure the person in your life was actually, he paused, real. She wanted to make sure I was real. The word landed between them with more weight than he'd probably intended. Sophie looked up at him. They were standing very close. The porch light made the space between them warm against the dark. Are you? She said. Real? He looked at her for a long moment, not guardedly, just taking the question seriously in the way he took everything seriously. Yeah, he said. I think so. She got in the car before she did something she wasn't ready to do yet, and she drove home with the heater going full blast and the particular internal weather of someone who has identified a problem they already know they're not going to be able to solve by being sensible about it. February is when Ethan Cole decided to become a problem. It didn't announce itself as that at first. It arrived quietly, in the specific way that Ethan did most things. Through other people, through intermediaries, through the social network he maintained with the careful investment of someone who understood that information was a currency. Sophie found out through Daniel. Her brother called her on a Tuesday, which was unusual because Daniel communicated mostly by text, and the fact of a phone call told her before he said anything that something was off. I had lunch with Ethan today, Daniel said. Sophie set down what she was doing. Why? He called me, said he was in town and wanted to catch up. A pause. I know. I should have said no. You should have said no. I know. Daniel sounded uncomfortable in the way he did when he'd done something he'd already talked himself into regretting. He asked a lot of questions about Marcus, about you and Marcus. What kind of questions? Like, had I met him before the dinner? How long had you actually known him? Whether I thought things seemed... He stopped. He used the word rushed. Sophie said nothing. He also mentioned that Damien Cross's company has been in the news. Something about a business deal. I don't follow any of that stuff, but he seemed to know a lot about it. What else? Daniel was quiet for a second. He said he thought you might be in over your head, that someone like Cross had a certain type, and he wasn't sure you were it. A pause. I told him he could mind his own business. Thank you. Sophie. Her brother's voice changed. What's going on? Really? She sat for a moment, then she said, I'll explain eventually, just ignore anything Ethan says. He has a very specific interest in me being unhappy. Yeah, Daniel said. I got that impression. After she hung up, she sat with the particular cold weight of knowing that Ethan was moving pieces. She'd watched him do it before. Never directly, never in ways you could point at cleanly. He operated through suggestion and implication and the slow, patient work of making you doubt what you knew. She told Damien that night on the phone. He was quiet for a moment after she finished. Okay. He knows who you are now. He's going to, I know what he's going to do, Damien said. Let him. It's not that simple. Why not? Sophie pressed the phone harder against her ear. Because what he's going to say has enough truth in it to do damage. He's going to say that I'm with you for your money. He's going to say that I was nobody before and now I'm attached to somebody, and he's going to make it look like that's all it is. She stopped. And the thing is, your world and my world are very different. I work 3 jobs. I have a cactus and a water-stained ceiling and a credit card I'm still paying down from a mistake I made 2 years ago. And you have... She didn't finish the sentence. I know what I have, Damien said. Then you know how it looks. I know how Ethan Cole wants it to look, he said. That's different. She appreciated that. She did. But she'd been in the business of being looked at from the outside for long enough to know that the difference between how things looked and how things were didn't always survive contact with a room full of people who'd already made up their minds. I'm just telling you it's coming, she said. I heard you. A pause. Sophie, are you scared of what people will think? Or are you scared of what you think? The question went somewhere she hadn't expected. She didn't answer immediately, which was its own kind of answer. Both, she said finally. Okay. He didn't push further, just held the word she'd given him, the way he held most things, without elaborating it into something she hadn't said. The rumors started the first week of March. Millhaven was not a large town. It had the particular social physics of small places, where information moved in 2 speeds, slowly through official channels and very quickly through the ones that mattered. Someone had told someone who had told someone else, and by the time Sophie heard it from Kara, her sister-in-law, who was 6 months pregnant and had the particular bluntness of someone who no longer had patience for soft landings, it had already acquired the smooth edges of a story that had been passed around enough times to feel established. The version Kara heard. Sophie Bennett had met Damien Cross at a fundraiser in Denver, had pursued him strategically, had used the family dinner as a way of establishing legitimacy in front of people who knew her. The woman who moved to Millhaven 18 months ago with nothing had found herself a billionaire, and wasn't that convenient? Sophie sat across from Kara in Kara's kitchen and listened to it. This is Ethan, she said when Kara finished. I know, Kara said. Daniel knows, but other people don't. She put her hands on her stomach in the habitual way of late pregnancy. He's been talking to people, Soph, your mother's circle, people at the grill. She paused. People who knew you when you were with him. Sophie looked at the table. The particular hollow feeling of having someone go through your reputation the way a pickpocket went through a coat, quickly, with familiarity, knowing exactly where you kept things. The part that bothers me, Kara said carefully, is that I don't know enough to counter it, because you haven't actually... She stopped. Told you what's real, Sophie finished. Yeah. Sophie looked at her sister-in-law. Kara was 31 and direct, and had no investment in anything except the actual truth, which made her both the right person and the hardest person to tell. So Sophie told her. All of it. The original lie, the invented Marcus, the diner in the snowstorm, Damien's strange and quiet willingness to walk into a dinner for someone he didn't know, the phone calls, the Christmas market, the Moonhouse greenhouse, the Sunday evenings and the Wednesday afternoons, and the way his daughter had held her hand through an icy patch and then kept holding it. Kara listened without interrupting, which was a significant commitment. When Sophie finished, Kara said, So it started fake. It started fake. And now? Sophie was quiet for a moment. Now it's the realest thing in my life, which I know sounds like you're terrified, Kara said. Sophie looked at her. Which makes sense, Kara continued, because you finally have something actually worth losing. The words landed with the clean precision of true things. Sophie felt them in her sternum. That specific ache, the one she'd been walking around for weeks, finally named. He doesn't know everything, she said, about how it started. He knows I lied to my family about being married. He doesn't know. She stopped. He doesn't know that I've been managing the story this whole time, that my family still thinks his name is Marcus, that it's all still technically built on the same lie. Kara was quiet. I've been meaning to tell him, Sophie said. You keep not doing it. Yes. Because if you tell him, he can decide to leave. Kara said it simply, not cruelly. And right now, as long as he doesn't know, you get to keep it. Sophie pressed her fingers to her eyes. That's a terrible reason to not tell someone the truth. Yep, Kara said. They sat in the kitchen with the sound of the clock and Kara's cat walking across the counter and the specific weight of what Sophie needed to do and had been not doing for too long. She told Damien that she needed to tell him something and asked if she could come over. He said yes. She drove to his house on a Thursday evening in March when the snow was starting to look tired, that late winter gray-brown that meant something was about to change. Lily was already in bed. Damien had left a lamp on in the living room and made coffee without asking, and sat across from her in the armchair with his forearms on his knees and the listening posture she'd come to know, completely still, completely present, giving her the room she needed to say whatever she was going to say. She told him. She started from the beginning. Not the diner, he knew that part, but before. The Thanksgiving that had produced Marcus. The way she'd built the lie incrementally, adding detail each time her family asked for more. The fact that her family still called him Marcus and believed that was his name, believed they'd been together for 2.5 years before the dinner that had actually been the first night she'd ever seen his face. She talked for about 15 minutes without looking at him. When she stopped, the room was quiet. Okay, he said. She looked up. Okay? I knew you'd been managing the story. His voice was even. You were too good at the details for it to have been improvised. I should have told you earlier. Yeah. No softening on it, just yeah. Why didn't you? She'd had multiple answers prepared for this, and they all felt small now. Because I didn't want you to think I was someone who did things like this, who lied to the people around them for 2 years. She paused. And then I got to know you, and I didn't want you to reassess. He was looking at her with the expression she couldn't entirely read, the layered one, the one that held more than it showed. Has anything you've told me been a lie? He said. She thought about it seriously. No. Has anything you've shown me been a performance? No. Then stop. He said it quietly, but with enough weight that it landed. The lie existed. It was a bad call, and you know that, and you've known it. But everything since the diner, you didn't lie to me. You kept something from me, which isn't the same thing. Sophie looked at him. You're being very calm about this. I'm not calm, he said. I'm deciding. She waited. The issue, he said, isn't what you told your family. The issue is that Ethan Cole has been in town planting things with people who know you, and some of those people are your family, and eventually this is going to arrive at a moment where things need to be set straight. I know. And when that moment comes, I need to know what you want to happen. He looked at her steadily. Not what you want to avoid, what you actually want. Sophie had been thinking about this. She'd been thinking about it since the diner, in some form, the question of what she actually wanted swimming underneath every other thought, like something she kept seeing from the corner of her eye and turning away from before she could look directly at it. She forced herself to look at it now. I want my family to know the truth, she said, the whole truth, about how we met and what Marcus was and why I did it. A pause. And I don't want to lose... She stopped. Say it, he said. She looked at him, at the dark, tired, careful eyes that had been paying attention to her since a snowstorm in December, at the man who'd walked into a dinner for a stranger and answered every question with the kind of honesty she'd spent years being told was naive. I don't want to lose this, she said. Whatever this is. The room was very quiet. Damien unfolded from the armchair and moved to the couch next to her, close enough that his arm was against hers. He didn't do anything else, didn't reach for her hand, didn't say anything orchestrated, just moved close enough that she could feel the solid warmth of him and sat with her while she figured out how to breathe again. "You're not going to lose it," he said quietly. "You can't promise that." "No," he agreed. "But I can tell you I'm still here." Sophie looked at the lamp on the side table, the gold circle it made on the floor, the half-assembled puzzle she'd become familiar with over the past 2 months, different sections of it complete now, the middle still scattered. "Ethan is going to make this worse before he stops," she said. "Probably. He found out what you're worth. Somewhere between December and now. He knows." She paused. "And he's going to use it to make the whole story look like it was always about money. Me and you, like I engineered it." "Did you?" She looked at him. "Sophie," the faintest trace of something in his voice that was almost warmth. "I'm asking so you can hear yourself say no." "No," she said. "I asked a stranger in a diner to help me survive one dinner. I had no idea who you were." "I know." He looked at her steadily. "So does anyone who actually paid attention that night." But the story Ethan was building didn't need to survive scrutiny. Stories rarely did. They just needed to circulate, and they needed to arrive at the right people at the right vulnerable moment, and they needed to resonate with something the listener already half believed. Her mother called in late March. Sophie had been expecting this call the way you expected a bill you couldn't pay, aware it was coming, unable to do much but wait for it to arrive. Her mother's voice was careful, the kind of careful that held something it hadn't decided how to say yet. "I ran into Ethan at Patricia's garden club," she said, which told Sophie immediately whose version of events had landed where. "Mom, I'm not saying I believe him." Her mother's voice was firm on this. "I'm not. But Sophie, he said some things that I—" She stopped. "He said you didn't know Damien before the dinner, that you'd only just met him." "That's true," Sophie said. Silence on the line. "I know it sounds bad," Sophie said. "I know how it sounds, but everything that's happened since then has been real." "Honey," her mother's voice shifted into the register Sophie had grown up afraid of. Not cruel, but uncertain in a way that expressed itself as doubt. "He also said, he said Marcus doesn't exist, that you invented him." Sophie closed her eyes. "Is that true?" She could hear underneath her mother's voice the thing her mother wasn't saying, the revision, the slow, unhappy re-examination of 2.5 years of conversations. All the time she'd asked about Marcus and Sophie had given her a character. "Yes," Sophie said. The silence was longer this time. "I'm sorry," Sophie said. "I'm really sorry. I should have—" "Why?" Her mother's voice had gone quieter. "Why did you feel like you needed to do that?" And that was the question, wasn't it? The one that had been underneath everything from the beginning. Not the what of the lie, but the why. What Sophie had been trying to avoid. What hunger she'd been trying to feed with someone she'd invented. She thought about Aunt Patrice in the kitchen at Thanksgiving, asking if Sophie was ever going to find someone. She thought about her mother's face when she said, "Actually, I'm seeing someone, Bess." That immediate, visible relief. The specific exhaustion of being the person in a family who didn't quite fit the shape of what love was supposed to look like. "Because I wanted you to stop worrying about me for a minute," Sophie said. Her voice was steady. It cost her. "And I didn't know how to do that by telling the truth." Her mother didn't say anything for a long time. "Damien is real," Sophie said. "What we have is real. I know how it started looks terrible. I know that. But what's been happening since December? Every Sunday evening, every time Lily draws something and asks me to look at it, every time he— Mom, I'm not performing for you. I'm not managing a story. I'm just— It's real." Her mother exhaled, a long, tired sound that held a dozen things Sophie couldn't quite parse. "I need some time," her mother said finally. "Okay. I'm not angry. I just need to think." "Okay," Sophie said again. The call ended and Sophie sat on the edge of her bed in the quiet of her apartment and felt the specific loneliness of having told the truth and having it not fix anything. She'd always thought honesty would feel better than this. She'd imagined a moment of revelation that resolved things cleanly. What she had instead was the truth out in the air, raw and without armor, and a mother who needed time, and an ex-boyfriend who was not done, and a man she was not sure she deserved who had told her, "I'm still here," like it was a simple thing. She picked up her phone, put it back down, picked it up again. She didn't call Damien. She sat with it instead, with all of it, the uncomfortable specific weight of it, because she'd spent years outsourcing her difficult feelings to the people around her, and she was trying to stop. She made tea. She sat at the window with Gerald. She told him, quietly and without expecting a response, "I think I'm in trouble." Gerald, in his terracotta pot with its chipped rim, did not respond. Outside, the late March snow had turned to rain, and the streets of Millhaven were dark and reflective, and the light from the windows across the way made yellow shapes on the wet pavement that looked, if you tilted your head a certain way, like something trying to hold on. She thought about Lily, looking at the color swatch of aged paperback yellow, and saying it sounded like something trying to hold on. She thought about Damien keeping 47 voicemails. She thought about Ethan, with his permanent smile and his careful campaign, and what he was building toward. Because he was building toward something. She could feel it. The individual pieces she'd seen were not the whole thing. They were the pressure building behind a door. She sat with that knowledge and let herself be afraid of it, because being afraid of the real thing was better than performing calm she didn't feel. Then she washed her cup. She went to bed. She did not sleep well, but she slept, which was something. In the morning, there was a drawing in her messages. Lily, through Damien's phone, had sent a new installment of The Moon House. Gerald had been given his own wing. She'd drawn him with a face. He looked, inexplicably, like he was doing okay. Sophie held her phone and felt the fragile thing in her chest refuse to go quiet, refuse to shrink, refuse to do the sensible thing and prepare itself for the drop. She texted back, "Gerald says this is the most dignified he's ever looked." 3 minutes passed. Lily says dignity is important, especially in space. Tell her she's right. She put her phone down. She got dressed. She went to work. She got through the day the way she'd gotten through most hard days in her life, 1 hour at a time, carrying the weight without letting it show, waiting for the moment when she could put it down somewhere safe. The difference was that now she had somewhere safe. Whether she was going to let herself actually use it, that was the question she hadn't answered yet. Her mother called back on a Thursday, 6 days after the first call. Sophie was between the lunch shift and the dinner shift, sitting in her car in the grill's parking lot with a sandwich she'd made from leftover bread, and the particular mental flatness that came from working 8 hours on 4 hours of sleep. She'd been carrying the weight of the previous week the way you carried something awkward, not heavy enough to put down, not light enough to stop noticing. She picked up on the first ring. "I've been thinking," her mother said. "I know." Sophie set the sandwich on the passenger seat. "Mom, Let me finish, Her mother's voice was composed. Not cold, composed, the way Margaret Bennett got when she'd decided something and needed to say it properly. "I've been thinking about what you told me, and I've been thinking about the dinner in December, and I've been trying to be honest with myself about my part in it." Sophie was quiet. "I pushed you," her mother said. I wasn't cruel about it. I don't think I was cruel, but I made it very clear for a very long time that I was worried about you, and I made that worry your problem." A pause. "Aunt Patrice at Thanksgiving, the comments about your jobs, the way I'd ask about your love life, and then not quite hide my reaction to the answer." She stopped. "I made you feel like you needed to produce something, someone, so I'd stop looking at you that way." Sophie pressed her fingers to her mouth. "I didn't know I was doing it," her mother said. "That's not an excuse, I'm just—" Her voice shifted slightly. "I'm saying I understand why you did it. I don't think you should have, but I understand why." "Mom." Sophie's voice came out rougher than she intended. "I'm sorry. I'm genuinely sorry. It was a stupid, cowardly thing to do, and I should have just been honest with you years ago about how your worry felt." Her mother made a small sound. Not quite a laugh, something softer. "We're both working on that, apparently." They were quiet together for a moment. The parking lot was empty except for a truck idling at the far end and the sound of wind off the mountain. Tell me about him, her mother said. The real version, not Marcus, Damien. So Sophie did. Sitting in her car with her forgotten sandwich, she told her mother about the diner. The snow, the 6% battery, the absolute bottom-of-the-barrel desperation that had produced the most inadvertently significant sentence of her life. She told her about the drive to Birchwood Lane and how he'd asked what firm before he'd agreed to anything, and how he'd walked into that house like a man who understood exactly what was at stake for her without her having to explain it. She told her about the phone calls, about Lily's commissioned inquiry into her favorite color, about the painted spoon and the silver dollar pancakes arranged tallest to shortest because that was the correct order, about the moon house and Gerald's dedicated greenhouse wing and Rutherford, the future moondog, about Sunday evenings and Wednesday afternoons and the way a life could build itself around two people before either of them officially agreed to let it. Her mother listened to all of it. When Sophie finished, she was quiet for long enough that Sophie checked to make sure the call was still connected. He kept the voicemails, her mother said. 47 of them. Another silence. That's the detail that gets me, her mother said, and her voice was different now, softer, with the specific texture of a woman who had been married for 38 years and understood what it meant to be kept. That's the detail that tells you who someone is. Sophie looked out the windshield at the gray April sky. Yeah, she said. I know. What does he know? About how you feel? Sophie thought about standing by her car in the dark in January saying, I don't want to lose this, whatever this is. About Damien moving to sit beside her on the couch and saying, I'm still here, like it was a simple thing. He knows I'm scared, she said. He knows why. He's been patient about it. Sophie. Her mother's voice went gentle in the way it did when she was about to say something she'd thought carefully about. The thing about patient men is that patience isn't the same as waiting forever. At some point, the person on the other end of the patience has to decide to move. Sophie stared at the steering wheel. I know, she said. Do you? Mom, I'm just asking. I know what you're asking. Sophie closed her eyes briefly. I'm working on it. Her mother said, work faster. And then, before Sophie could respond to that, come to dinner Sunday, both of you. I want to do it right this time. No. She told Damien about the dinner invitation that evening. He said, okay, Sunday works, and then was quiet for a moment and said, how are you? I'm okay. A pause. My mother told me to work faster. On what? On deciding to move. She said it carefully, leaving the edges of it visible. He was quiet on his end of the line. She heard the small sounds of his house, something in the kitchen, the muffled sound of the television Lily was probably watching past her bedtime. She's not wrong, he said. I know she's not. Sophie. I know, she said. I'm aware. I'm working on the part of myself that keeps expecting the drop. What drop? The floor, she said. The edge. The moment when things that were good stop being good. I've been waiting for it since December. He exhaled through his nose. Nothing's stopping. I know that logically. What does it need to not be logic, he said. Not impatiently. Genuinely asking, with the precision of someone who wanted to understand rather than fix. She thought about it. Time, she said finally. I think I just need more time. Okay, just that. We have time. She held the phone a second longer than necessary after they said goodnight. Then she put it down and stood in her kitchen and looked at Gerald, who had been moved to the windowsill where the afternoon light caught him best, and said out loud to no one, I'm going to have to get it together. Gerald remained private about his opinions. Look, the Sunday dinner at her mother's was smaller and quieter than December's. Just her parents, Daniel and Kara, and Lily, who Damien had brought without asking because Lily had heard the word dinner and had appeared at the front door already wearing her silver parka. Her mother opened the door and looked at Lily for approximately 2 seconds before her face did something complicated and warm. And who is this? She said. Lily looked up at her with the evaluating attention Sophie had first encountered at the painted spoon. I'm Lily. My dad said this was a family dinner, so I asked if I could come. She paused. He said I could if I was polite. I'm being polite. You absolutely are, Sophie's mother said. and then she crouched down to Lily's level, which was not something Margaret Bennett did easily in the good slacks she was wearing, and she said, "I'm Margaret. I'm Sophie's mom." Lily considered this. "Sophie talks about you." "Does she?" "She says you worry a lot." Lily said it without judgment, the way children state observable facts. "But Dad says worrying is just love with nowhere to go, so I think it's okay." Margaret looked up at Sophie over Lily's head with an expression Sophie couldn't entirely decode, something like surprise and something like recognition, and something that might have been the particular feeling of being understood by a 6-year-old before you'd finished figuring yourself out. "Come inside," her mother said. "Are you hungry?" "Yes," said Lily. "What kind of soup is it?" "Chicken and rice." Lily turned to Damien. "That's acceptable." Damien caught Sophie's eye over the top of Lily's head, and his face did the thing it sometimes did, the edge of something that wasn't quite a smile, but was pointed directly at one. The dinner was different from December. Less performance, more actual conversation. Her father took Lily into the living room before dinner to show her his collection of architectural models, scale replicas he'd built over the years of interesting structures, which he'd never before found an audience interested enough to actually discuss, and Lily's running commentary on the structural logic of each one could be heard clearly from the kitchen where Sophie and her mother and Kara were assembling things. "She's extraordinary," her mother said quietly. "I know," Sophie said. "She has his eyes." Her mother glanced toward the living room. "The way she looks at things, like she's already decided how much of herself to trust the situation with." Sophie looked at her mother. Sometimes Margaret Bennett saw things so clearly and expressed them so precisely that Sophie forgot they had spent years struggling to understand each other. "That's exactly what it is," Sophie said. Her mother touched her arm briefly, just her hand on Sophie's forearm a second or two, and went back to the soup. Kara leaned toward Sophie and said under her breath, "Your mother is having a moment." "I can see that." "Also, that child just told your father that his model of the falling water house has incorrect cantilever proportions, and he immediately agreed with her." Sophie looked through the doorway to where Lily was standing with her hands on her hips, examining the model while Sophie's father nodded seriously beside her. "She looked it up," Sophie said. "She looks everything up." "She's going to be terrifying when she's 30, Kara said, with genuine admiration. After dinner, Damien helped her father with the dishes, which her father always did alone as a matter of preference, and yet somehow did not object to with Damien, and Sophie sat at the kitchen table with her mother while Kara dozed on the couch, and Daniel and Lily had commenced what appeared to be an extremely serious card game. "I owe you an apology," her mother said. She was drying a serving dish with the methodical attention she gave to kitchen tasks. "A real one, not the kind where I explain myself so much it becomes about me." Sophie looked at her. "Mom, I'm sorry I made you feel like who you were wasn't enough." Her mother said it to the dish, not to Sophie, which was the only way Margaret could say hard things. Sideways, without full eye contact, because full eye contact made it too raw and she couldn't get through raw. "I'm sorry I let Patrice say the things she said at the table without stopping her. I'm sorry that I communicated, in 100 small ways, that I needed you to be a certain shape to fit in this family. You've always fit." She looked up. "I just wasn't always clear about that." Sophie's throat tightened. She didn't say anything for a moment. "I used to think," her mother continued, "that the right kind of love came in a specific presentation. Good job, nice house, clear plan. Your father had those things when I met him. I assumed that was what love required." She set the dish down. "What that man did for you at Thanksgiving, and I know now that it was December and you'd just met, and it was one night, but what he did, the way he sat at my table, that wasn't a presentation. That was someone who was paying attention to you." She paused. "I've known a lot of people in my life. Very few of them pay attention to other people like that." Sophie pressed her lips together. "He does," she said, when she trusted her voice. "He pays attention to everything." Her mother nodded, picked up another dish. "Then don't wait too long," she said. "That's all I'm saying." April moved into May. The snow on the mountain retreated to the higher elevations. Millhaven's Main Street acquired the specific energy of a tourist town coming back to life. Window boxes being planted, the old hotel repainting its shutters, the afternoon light lasting longer every day. Sophie quit the gift shop. It happened not because of anything dramatic, but because she'd been adding up what she spent in gas and what she made in wages and what the candle discount was actually worth, and found that the math had stopped making sense 2 months ago. Her manager said she'd expected it and wished her well, which was the most painless professional departure Sophie had ever had. She picked up more hours at the grill, which she actually liked, and started picking up freelance bookkeeping work that Kara, who ran a small business, had referred her toward. Numbers had always made sense to her in a way people sometimes didn't, and working with them from her apartment table on weekday mornings turned out to be the most peaceful part of her week. She told Damien about this, and he said, "You're good at seeing patterns." "In numbers?" "In everything," he said. "You notice things people don't think to look for." She'd asked once, carefully, if he'd been involved in sending work her way. He'd said no with enough flatness that she believed him. She'd appreciated it, both the no and the fact that it had clearly been a considered restraint, that it had cost him something to not do more than he'd been asked. She was learning the specific shape of how he loved. That was what it was. She'd stopped being indirect with herself about that word, if not yet with him. He loved by staying, by being there on Sunday evenings and replying to texts about Gerald and showing up when he said he would. He loved by not fixing things she hadn't asked him to fix, by asking what she wanted and then actually trying to give her that instead of what he thought she should want. It was a different language than she'd learned to speak. She was learning it. Ethan Cole made his move in the last week of May. In retrospect, Sophie could see the shape of it. The weeks of groundwork, the conversations with her mother's circle, the things he'd said to Daniel, all of it had been the setup. What he'd been building toward was the New Year's fundraiser. The Millhaven New Year's fundraiser was technically a misnomer. It had been planned for December but rescheduled twice, finally landing on the first Saturday of June, which everyone continued to call the New Year's event because it had been on the calendar so long the name had stuck. It was the biggest social event of the year in Millhaven, a fundraiser for the County Hospital Foundation, held in the ballroom of the old Whitmore Hotel, attended by the business community, the town's established families, the hospital board, and enough people who knew each other that it functioned as the place where reputations were either confirmed or revised. Damien attended every year because he was on the Hospital Foundation board and because his company was one of the 3 largest donors. Sophie had not been planning to go until her mother called and said she'd bought 4 tickets and was putting Sophie's name on one of them. "Mom, I don't think it's time," her mother said, in the tone that was not a negotiation. Sophie went. She wore the black dress she'd bought in Denver for a work event 2 years ago that she'd never actually attended, and she borrowed Kara's good earrings, and she drove to the Whitmore Hotel on a Saturday evening in early June, feeling the particular unease of someone who suspects a shoe is about to drop and can't see it coming. The ballroom was full when she arrived. 300 people, maybe more, the round tables draped in white with low floral centerpieces, a band playing at the appropriate volume for people to talk over. She found her mother's table and hugged her parents and Kara, who was 8 months pregnant and radiant, and moving with the careful deliberateness of someone carrying something irreplaceable. Damien was there. He found her 20 minutes after she arrived, through the crowd, and something in his expression when he saw her, a brief, unguarded quality, the window opening slightly, made her glad she'd borrowed the earrings. "You look," he started. "Don't," she said, which she knew made no sense, but she couldn't handle a compliment from him tonight with whatever was coming, and he seemed to understand that because he stopped and just stood beside her instead. "Ethan's here," she said. "I know." He'd already seen him. She could tell by the quality of his stillness. "He's been working the room for an hour." Sophie followed his line of sight. Ethan was across the ballroom near the bar, with a glass of whiskey and the comfortable posture of a man who felt he was exactly where he was supposed to be. He was talking to people she recognized, 2 members of the hospital board, a woman whose family had been in Millhaven for 3 generations, a couple from her mother's church. "He's not going to let this end quietly," she said. "No," Damien agreed. "He's not." They stood together for a moment. The band shifted to something slower. "Whatever happens tonight," Damien said, "I need you to not disappear." She looked at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean when it gets hard, and it's going to get hard, I need you to stay in the room, not leave, not go quiet. He paused. Can you do that? She thought about every hard thing she'd handled by going small, by making herself lighter, less present, less likely to take up space that might be contested. I'll try, she said. That's enough, he said. It happened at 9:40. The formal part of the evening had concluded, the remarks from the hospital board, the presentation of the fundraising total, the thank yous. People had eaten and were drinking and circulating, and the room had the loosened quality of a party that had passed its most structured hour. Sophie was standing with her mother near one of the tall windows when Ethan materialized from the crowd with a fresh drink and a smile, and the practiced ease of someone who'd been waiting for exactly this configuration of people. Margaret, he kissed her mother's cheek in the way he'd been doing for years, with the warmth of a man who understood the value of a mother's approval. Sophie turned to her with the same smile, calibrated slightly differently. You look great. Thank you, she said. Flat. He looked past her toward where Damien was talking with two men across the room. Quite an evening for your, what are we calling him? Boyfriend seems insufficient given the build-up. Ethan. Her mother's voice had a coolness in it. I'm just making conversation. He looked at Sophie. His voice dropped just slightly, still audible to her mother, intended to be audible to her mother, but performing intimate. I've been thinking a lot about how this all started. You and Cross, the convenient timing. Ethan, Sophie kept her voice steady. Don't. I'm not trying to cause trouble. The smile stayed fixed. I'm genuinely... He raised his voice slightly, no longer pretending to be private, with the seamless shift of someone who'd been planning this for weeks. I'm genuinely curious, Sophie, because there are people here tonight who've known you for years, who've watched you struggle, and now you're suddenly... What? The girlfriend of one of the wealthiest men in the state? The conversations nearest to them slowed, not because anyone was being obvious about it, just the natural physics of a room responding to a change in tone. Sophie felt her mother stiffen beside her. Ethan continued, voice carrying just enough. I think the people who care about you deserve to know that you met this man once. One time, a dinner that you arranged, a dinner built on a lie you'd been telling your own family for 2 years. And within weeks you'd inserted yourself into his life, his home, his daughters. That's enough. Damien's voice came from behind her. Sophie hadn't heard him cross the room. She hadn't felt him approaching. But he was there now, close enough that she could feel the slight warmth of him, and his voice was absolutely level. Not raised, not heated, just present in the way that made everything else quiet. Ethan turned. His smile recalibrated. Damien, we were just talking about you. I heard. Damien's eyes moved to the small cluster of people who had slowed their own conversations to listen. He didn't lower his voice. He didn't modulate it for privacy. He spoke at exactly the volume of a man who was choosing to be heard. I want to make sure I say this once, and clearly, because I think there's been some confusion about what happened, and I'd rather address it directly than let the version Ethan's been circulating go unchallenged. The room had gone quiet in the expanding radius around them. Not silent, but measurably quieter, the band's next song not quite filling the space. Sophie's hands were cold. She kept them still. Damien looked at Ethan for a moment, not with hostility, just with the clear-eyed steadiness of a man who didn't need the other person to agree with him to say what was true. Then he looked at the room. Sophie didn't know who I was when she asked me to help her, he said. She asked a stranger in a diner because she was out of options and she was trying to protect herself from the specific humiliation of walking into her family's house alone and being seen as someone who couldn't hold her life together. He paused. I said yes because it was snowing and I hadn't done anything for someone else's sake in longer than I care to admit, and something about her, the way she was handling a bad situation without falling apart, made me want to. He wasn't performing. He was just telling the truth in the same flat, direct way he told Sophie things when he wanted them to land without decoration. She had no idea what I was worth, he continued. She didn't look me up until weeks after the dinner, at which point I had to explain to her why the number she found didn't change anything about what was already happening between us. A pause. She didn't believe me for a while. That's the part Ethan would call suspicious. I call it someone who'd been taught to look for the drop, to wait for the moment when something good turned out to be a transaction. He glanced at Ethan briefly. Not with anger, with something more dismissive than anger. The particular disinterest of a man who'd already placed someone accurately and didn't need to revise it. The original lie existed, Damien said, back to the room. Sophie told her family she was married because she needed them to stop worrying about her in the specific way that families sometimes worry. Loudly, and in a direction that says more about their fear than about the person they're worried about. She shouldn't have done it. She knows that. She told her family the truth in March. He paused. The man she asked to play the part of that husband turned into someone she actually chose. And I am not interested in having that characterized as a scheme by someone whose main interest in this is that he lost something he never actually had. Ethan's smile was still in place, but it was thinner now, held up by will instead of ease. Damien, his voice was still smooth. I understand you care about her, but you have to admit that the optics, Damien said, are what you've been manufacturing for 4 months. Still level, still quiet. You talked to her brother. You talked to people in her mother's social circle. You've been doing the careful, patient work of making a story sound like fact, because the alternative, a woman you once made feel like she was lucky to be tolerated finding something better, is something you can't let just exist without trying to take a piece of it. The room was very quiet. Ethan set his drink down on a nearby table. His jaw had tightened. The smile was gone. That's, he started. I'm done, Damien said simply. If you'd like to have a different conversation at a different time, that's fine. But I'm not going to stand here and watch you do what you've been doing to her in front of people who love her. He turned away from Ethan. He turned to Sophie. And for a moment it was just the two of them in the radius of quiet that had expanded around this conversation, and he looked at her with the tired, careful, entirely specific attention that had been looking at her since a snowstorm in December. And she was aware that the room was watching, and she was aware that her mother was 2 feet away, and she was aware that her hands were still cold, and her heart was going at a rate that was not medically ideal. I should have said this a while ago, he said, and his voice was lower now, intended for her alone, even if others could hear it. I kept waiting for the right moment, and there isn't one, so he exhaled slightly. I'm not looking for convenient. I'm not looking for a transaction. I spent 4 years being very careful and very steady and very alone, and I am not interested in being any of those things more than I have to be. A pause. I'm interested in you. The actual you. The one who lies to her family for 2 years because she can't figure out how to say, I need you to stop looking at me like I'm failing. The one who talks to her cactus and names him Gerald. The one who sat in a booth at my daughter's diner and took every question about the moon house seriously because Lily needed someone to take it seriously. He paused. I'm asking you to stop waiting for the drop. I'm asking you to let this be the thing it's been trying to be since December. Sophie looked at him. Her mother made a small sound behind her that Sophie recognized as Margaret Bennett successfully containing a feeling in public, which required significant effort. Somewhere to her left, Kara said very quietly to Daniel, I told you. Sophie said, You could have said that any of the 100 Sunday evenings I was waiting for you to say something. He looked at her. You were waiting? I was obviously waiting. She heard her own voice, steadier than she expected, with an edge of something that wasn't quite exasperation but was adjacent to it. You are extremely patient, and I have been extremely frustrated about it. Something broke loose in his face. Not all the way. Not the full thing, because he was who he was and he didn't do things all the way in public, but enough. The things she'd been seeing glimpses of for 5 months, the underneath the careful, the version of him that came through in the way he spoke about Lily and the way he played the voicemails. I didn't want to push, he said. You could have pushed a little, she said. A brief pause, then quietly, so only she could hear. Are you saying I have permission? Sophie looked at him for one long moment. At the man who had walked into a dinner for a stranger and answered every question with the truth. Who had kept 47 voicemails. Who had sat beside her on a couch and said, I'm still here, like it was a simple thing. Yeah, she said, you have permission. He reached out and took her hand. Just that. his hand around hers, in a room full of people, without any performance attached to it. The same way he did most things, quietly, like he meant it, like he'd already decided. Ethan Cole left the party 40 minutes later. Sophie noticed his departure without looking for it. She just became aware, at some point, that the particular quality of discomfort that had been sitting at the edge of her awareness all evening had lifted. She didn't watch him go. She was talking to her father, who had found Damien again and resumed what appeared to be an ongoing structural analysis that had started at the December dinner and picked up tonight without missing a beat. Her mother found her near the dessert table at 10:30. Margaret Bennett was not a woman who cried in public. She had very clear opinions about the appropriate management of emotion in social settings. Sophie had watched her hold herself together at funerals, at difficult family dinners, at her own mother's decline in the final year of her life. She was not crying now, but her eyes were doing something specific, bright in the way that meant she was managing. "Your father," she said, "who has not volunteered an opinion about any person you've ever dated in 30 years, told me on the way in tonight that he hoped things worked out." She paused. "He said he was a good man. That was the whole sentence. He didn't say anything else." Sophie felt her throat tighten. Her father did not volunteer opinions. Her father communicated love through fixed things and structural observations, and the occasional nod that meant more than it looked like. "Mom." "I know," her mother said. "I know." She touched Sophie's arm in the same brief way she had in the kitchen. Her hand on Sophie's forearm, a second or two, more than it looked like. "I'm sorry it took me this long." "It took me longer," Sophie said. Her mother made the small sound that wasn't a laugh. "We're working on it," she said, which was what she'd said on the phone in April, and which apparently had become the honest accounting of what they were doing. Not fixed, not resolved, but working. Sophie looked across the room to where Damien was standing near the window with Lily's drawing in his jacket pocket. She'd put it there herself before he left, the latest Moonhouse installment, because Lily had said he should have it for luck. And he was laughing. Actually laughing. At something one of the hospital board members had said, his head slightly back, the thing she'd been watching for from the edges for 5 months, finally arriving without announcement, without drama, without her having to do anything except be in the room. Mrs. Paulson, who Sophie had met twice, had apparently told her the same thing, that he used to laugh more before. Sophie watched him laugh and felt the fragile thing in her chest stop being fragile. Felt it settle into something more solid. Not certainty. Nothing was certain. She'd stopped expecting certainty, but solidity. The weight of something that was going to be there tomorrow. She thought about December. The parking lot, the snow, the 6% battery, the absolute end of her rope that had produced the sentence that started all of this. She thought about Damien in the diner asking what firm, and the look on her mother's face at the door, and Lily taking her hand through the icy patch, and then not letting go. She thought about what Lily had said that the yellow of old paperbacks sounded like, something trying to hold on. She was done trying. She was just going to hold on. He drove her home that night. Lily was already with Mrs. Paulson, who'd agreed to the late hour without being asked. They drove through Millhaven in the dark with the windows up and the heater going and the particular quiet of two people who had said enough for one evening and didn't need to fill the rest of it. He pulled up in front of her apartment building and put the car in park, and they sat for a moment the way they had in December, in the diner parking lot, except that everything was different in the way that 5 months of Sundays and Wednesdays and Christmas markets and soup dinners had made everything different. "I meant what I said," he said. "In there." "I know you did," she said. "You don't say things you don't mean." "I know I was slow." "You were thorough," she said. "There's a difference." He looked at her in the dark of the car. The light from the street lamp came through the windshield at an angle, catching the side of his face, and he looked tired in the way she'd gotten used to. The carried weight tired, not the anxious kind. And he looked more open than she'd seen him, the careful arrangement of his face having relaxed in the way things relax after something has been said that needed saying. She leaned over and kissed him. It wasn't dramatic. It was a little awkward because of the center console, and she bumped his shoulder with hers in the process. and he made a sound that was surprised for approximately half a second, and then wasn't. His hand came up to the side of her face with a kind of careful, deliberate attention that was entirely him, the man who paid attention to everything, paying attention to this. When she pulled back, she said, "I've been waiting to do that for about 4 months." "Well, that's information I could have used earlier," he said. "I told you you could have pushed a little. I'm noting that for future reference." His hand was still against her jaw, and he was looking at her the way he sometimes looked at things he was deciding how much to trust. Not withholding, just careful, the habit of a man who had learned that the things worth having were worth being careful with. "Damien," she said. "Yeah." "I'm not going to disappear," she said. She wanted him to have that clearly, no uncertainty about it. "I know I've been on the edge of the room for months. I know I've been managing the distance, but I'm done doing that." He looked at her for a long moment. "Okay," he said. "Not I know or I believe you or any of the other things a person might say to smooth over the offering of a promise. Just okay, absorbing it, treating it the way he treated most real things, with the weight it deserved and nothing added on top." "Get some sleep," he said. "You too." "Sophie." He said her name in the low, specific way. "Thank you for staying in the room." She thought about what he'd asked of her earlier. "When it gets hard, I need you to stay in the room." She thought about standing in that ballroom with her hands cold and her heart going, and Ethan's voice carrying through the crowd, and Damien's beside hers, and the choice she'd made to stay put. "Thank you for making it worth staying in," she said. She got out of the car and walked to her building door. She didn't look back because she knew he was watching, and she didn't want to be the person who looked back. She wanted to be the person who walked toward the door knowing someone was watching, which was a different thing entirely. She climbed the stairs to her apartment. She unlocked the door. She stood in the kitchen in her good dress and her borrowed earrings, and Gerald was on the windowsill in the dark, and the apartment was small and the ceiling still had its water stain, and the stack of bills on the table had been partially addressed and partially not. It was her life, the actual one, not the performed version. She thought it might be enough. Her phone buzzed. Lily left this on the table before bed. "Said to give it to you tomorrow, but I thought you might want it tonight." A photo followed. Another drawing. Lily's style, crayon and conviction. It showed 2 people standing in what was recognizably a ballroom, one tall, one shorter, both with the crayon approximation of evening clothes. Between them, in large uneven letters, "Finally." Sophie stared at the spelling, texted back, "She means finally. I know what she means. Does she know what happened tonight? She knows I said things I'd been meaning to say." She said, "Took you long enough, Dad. She's not wrong." "No," he sent back. "She very rarely is." Sophie set her phone on the counter. She reached up and unclipped Kara's earrings and put them safely in their case and stood in the quiet of her apartment for a long moment. "Finally," Lily had written, in brown and silver crayon, with a yellow sun in the corner. The word had never looked more right. The summer after the fundraiser was the first summer in 4 years that Damien Cross did not spend entirely inside his own head. He noticed it in small ways first. The way he started leaving work at 6 instead of 8, not because anyone told him to, but because there was somewhere he actually wanted to be. The way he'd started keeping yellow things in the kitchen. A dish towel, a ceramic mug, a small jar of honey with a paper label the color of afternoon sun, without being fully conscious of doing it until Lily pointed at the honey one morning and said, with the satisfaction of someone whose theory had been confirmed, "That's Sophie's color." He'd looked at the honey and said, "Yeah, I guess it is." Lily had gone back to her cereal with the expression of a person who'd known something for a while and was content to let the adults catch up. The thing about grief, the particular kind that hollows you out and then hardens around the hollow, so that you become a version of yourself that functions but doesn't entirely fill its own shape, is that you stop noticing it after a while. It becomes the weather. You dress for it without thinking. You move through it without registering that you're moving through something. And then one day you're standing in your kitchen looking at a jar of honey and you realize the weather has changed and you didn't notice when it happened. And the not noticing is its own kind of gift, because if you'd seen it coming, you might have flinched. Damien had been flinching for 4 years. He hadn't realized how much of his energy had gone into the flinch, the permanent low-level bracing, the careful management of everything inside his radius, until the thing he'd been bracing against simply wasn't there anymore. Sophie did not fix him. He was clear-eyed enough to know that no one fixed anyone, and suspicious enough of that narrative to resist it when he felt it forming. What she did was more specific and more useful. She was present in a way that made presence feel safe again. She took up space without asking permission and held her own without needing him to hold it for her. And when she was scared, she said so. And when something was wrong, she didn't perform otherwise. And all of this, the ordinary, imperfect reality of a person who showed up as themselves, turned out to be what he'd needed for a long time without knowing what to call it. He asked her in July. Not with a plan. He'd made and discarded 3 plans because each one felt like a performance, and he'd given up on performance years ago. What happened instead was that they were on his porch on a Sunday evening in late July, the kind of evening where the light stays longer than you expect it to, and the air smells like pine and warm earth. And Lily was inside watching something, and they were sitting in the 2 wooden chairs with the view of the mountain, and Sophie had her feet up on the porch railing and was telling him about a bookkeeping client who had organized her receipts in a way that suggested a deep philosophical opposition to chronology. He wasn't watching the mountain. He was watching her profile in the late light, the way she used her hands when she talked, the fact that she was entirely comfortable in the quiet that lived alongside the talking, that she didn't need to fill every space. He'd been watching her for a while when he realized he'd stopped listening to the story. "Are you listening?" she said, not looking at him, like she'd sensed the shift. "No," he said. She turned, looked at him. "What are you doing?" "Thinking about asking you to marry me," he said. Sophie put her feet down from the railing. The evening was very still, a bird somewhere in the pines, the mountain going gold at its edges. She looked at him for a long moment. Her face was doing the thing it did when she was processing something, not hiding it exactly, but gathering herself, taking the full measure of whatever she'd been handed before she responded. "We've been together for 8 months, she said. 7.5. "That's not longer." She searched his face. "You're serious." "Sophie." He said her name in the way he did when he needed her to hear something clearly. "I've been serious since February. I've just been thorough," she said. The corner of her mouth moved. "Thorough," he agreed. She looked at her hands, looked at the mountain, looked back at him. He watched her work through it, the fear and the want and the specific internal negotiation of a person who had spent years expecting floors to give way, learning in real time that the floor under this particular moment was solid. "You don't have a ring," she said. "No." "Why not?" "Because I didn't want the ring to be the question. I wanted you to say yes to me first, and then we could go find a ring together." He paused. "If you want a ring, you don't have to want a ring." Sophie stared at him. "Who told you that was the right way to do it?" "No one," he said. "It just seemed right." She made a sound that was very close to a laugh. Not quite. She pressed her fingers to her mouth for a moment. He waited, because waiting was the thing he'd learned to do well, and because this particular waiting felt different from all the previous waiting. Not the patient holding of distance, but the present, alert attention of someone who was entirely here and entirely certain and willing to let the other person take the time they needed to arrive at the same place. "Lily knows," Sophie said. It wasn't a question. "She told me I was taking too long," he said. "Approximately 6 weeks ago." Sophie made the sound again. It became a laugh this time, short and real, the kind that surprised her. "What did you tell her?" "I told her I was being thorough." "And?" She said thoroughness was important, but so was not being boring about it. Sophie looked at him across the 2 wooden chairs. The light was going softer, the mountain turning a particular shade of amber that had no exact name. "Yes," she said. Just the one word. Quietly, looking straight at him. He exhaled, a long, slow exhale that he hadn't known he'd been holding. "Yeah?" "Yes," she said again, with slightly more conviction, like she was making sure it reached him. He reached across the gap between the chairs and took her hand. She turned her hand and held his back, and they sat like that as the light finished its daily argument with the mountain and lost gracefully, the way it always did. And the bird in the pine said whatever it was saying to whoever it was saying it to, and from inside the house they could hear Lily's program and the sound of the refrigerator opening and a 6-year-old's footsteps crossing the kitchen floor. The screen door banged open. Lily appeared on the porch in her socks, holding a glass of apple juice, and looked at the two of them with the penetrating attention she gave everything. She looked at their hands. She looked at her father's face. She looked at Sophie. "Finally," she said, without the spelling error this time. "Go back inside," Damien said. "I just came to get juice." "You have juice?" "I wanted to see what was happening." "Lily." She went back inside with great dignity, pausing at the screen door to say over her shoulder, "I was right, by the way." The screen door banged shut. Sophie was laughing. Actually laughing, the full version, and Damien watched her and felt the thing in his chest that he'd identified in February and confirmed in June, and stopped trying to be careful about somewhere in July. The specific, undefended warmth of a person who has let someone in past the part where they usually stop people. "She was right," Sophie said. "She usually is," he said. "It's a lot." They told Sophie's family on a Sunday 3 weeks later at the dinner table on Birchwood Lane, and the response was everything and nothing like Sophie had expected. Her mother cried. Quietly, controlled, into a dish towel in the kitchen, which Sophie only knew about because she went to help with the dessert and found her mother standing at the counter with her composure slightly dismantled and her eyes bright. "Mom!" "I'm fine," her mother said briskly. "I'm absolutely fine. Hand me the serving fork." Sophie handed her the serving fork. "I'm proud of you," her mother said, still not looking at her. "I don't say it enough. I've spent a lot of time. I've been so focused on the shape of things, the way they look, the way they fit into what I imagined, that I forgot to just be proud of you for being you." She stopped, drew a breath. "You are a good person, Sophie. You have always been a good person. I should have said that more." Sophie stood next to her mother in the kitchen that smelled like every childhood December and every difficult holiday and every meal that had been both a comfort and a battlefield, and she put her arm around her mother's shoulders, and her mother leaned into it slightly, which was the most her mother had ever leaned. "We're working on it," Sophie said. Her mother laughed, surprised, wet, the kind of laugh that comes out of tears and becomes its own kind of relief. "Yes," she said, "we are." Her father, when told the news, said, "Good," then shook Damien's hand with both of his, which Sophie had seen him do exactly twice before in her memory, both times for things he considered significant. Daniel said, "Finally." Kara said, "I told him it would be before the year was out." Daniel said, "You said September." Kara said, "It's August, so—" Lily sat at the dinner table and ate her soup in the correct order, tallest to shortest on the spoon, apparently, and when Sophie looked at her, she was already looking back with the steady, dark-eyed attention of her father's daughter. "You're my stepmom now," Lily said, stating a fact, checking it against Sophie's understanding of the situation. "Not quite yet," Sophie said. "There's a wedding first." Lily considered this. "I get to be in it." "Yes." "What color?" Sophie thought about it. "What color do you want?" Lily looked at the ceiling for a moment, running through her current rotation. "Silver," she said, "or the afternoon sun one, both maybe." "Both works," Sophie said. Lily nodded and went back to her soup. Settled. Confirmed. The matter handled. They got married in September. Not a large wedding, not the kind Damien's professional world might have expected from a man of his position, not the event that would have made the business pages. A ceremony in the meadow behind his house, under the trees that had started to turn, with the mountain visible and the air carrying the first real chill of autumn. Folding chairs on the grass, 112 people, a caterer from town who'd been doing Millhaven events for 20 years, and who, as Sophie had discovered in a coincidence that felt too small town to be real, had a running bet with Mrs. Paulson about when Damien Cross was going to start living again. Mrs. Paulson, who attended the wedding in a navy dress and cried from the third song onward, collected on that bet in October. Sophie's dress was the color of heavy cream, not white, and she'd found it in a shop in Denver on a Wednesday afternoon when she'd taken the day off work. The first day off she'd taken that wasn't sick leave in longer than she could remember. And she'd put it on in the dressing room and looked at herself in the mirror and thought, "This is the part where I cry," apparently. And then she had, briefly and without warning, into the silk lining of the dress's shoulder, and the shop owner had handed her a tissue and said, "Happens all the time," with the practical warmth of someone who had seen many versions of this same moment. She walked out through the back door of the house on Damien's arm because there was no traditional structure they wanted to perform. They'd built nothing the traditional way. Why start now? Her father was there to meet her at the edge of the meadow, and he put his hand over hers on Damien's arm and walked with them the last 20 feet to where the officiant was waiting. And he didn't say anything because he was Robert Bennett, and words were not his primary language, but the weight of his hand was clear. Lily stood at the front in silver and afternoon sun yellow, both holding a basket of autumn flowers with the focused seriousness of someone who had been assigned an important job and intended to execute it correctly. She'd practiced the petal distribution twice that morning. She'd been specific about the spacing. When Sophie reached the front, Lily handed the basket to Daniel's wife, Kara, who was now the mother of a 6-week-old boy named after Robert Bennett, a fact that had made Sophie's father fall briefly silent and then busy himself with fixing something in the kitchen, and took Sophie's free hand in both of hers. "You look nice," Lily said quietly. "Thank you," Sophie said. "So do you." "I know." She squeezed Sophie's hand once and then let go and took her place beside them, which was where she'd decided she needed to be, and no one had argued with her about it. The vows were written by both of them, separately, and neither had shared them with the other beforehand. This had been Sophie's suggestion, "I want to be surprised," and Damien had agreed, though she suspected he'd found it harder than he let on, being a man who prepared for things. He went first. He held his paper for a moment, looked at it, then looked at her and put the paper in his jacket pocket and said it without reading. "I was a very careful man," he said. "I'd gotten good at it. Careful is what happens when you've had something break that you didn't know how to fix, and your solution is to not let anything else get close enough to break. I'm not describing this like it was a virtue. It wasn't." He paused. "You asked me a question in a diner on the worst night of your year, and I said yes, and I told myself at the time it was because I hadn't done something for someone else's sake in a while. That was part of it. But the other part, the part I didn't say out loud for a long time, was that you were sitting across a diner booth handling a bad situation without falling apart, and something in me recognized that, recognized the specific skill of getting through things." He stopped. "I have spent 4 years being steady, being reliable, being the person who does not ask for things because asking means wanting, and wanting means there's something you can lose." He looked at her, and she could see in the bright September light the exact thing she'd been watching for in glimpses since December. Fully visible now, unguarded, the underneath the careful. "You taught me that asking is not a liability, that wanting something is not the same as being afraid to lose it, that a person can be steady and still need people. Those are not contradictions." He paused. "I will spend the rest of my life being someone worth choosing, not because you need me to be perfect. You've seen me when I'm not, and you stayed, but because you deserve someone who is still trying." He took a breath. "And I will never, in the time we have, stop trying." Sophie had been doing very well up to the last sentence. She stopped doing very well at the last sentence. She pressed her lips together and looked at the mountain for a moment and heard Lily beside her say very quietly, "It's okay to cry, Sophie. I have a tissue." She took the tissue. She didn't use it yet. She would need it in a moment. She unfolded her own paper. "I lied to my family for 2 years about having a husband," she said. "I'm starting there because I think it matters. Not because I'm proud of it. I'm not. But because that specific lie, born out of a specific shame, is what produced the night in the diner that produced the rest of this." She looked up briefly. "I was so tired of being the one who couldn't get it right. The job, the city, the person. I kept making choices that made sense to me in the moment and looked confused from the outside. And I'd spent so long trying to make the outside view match the internal reality that I'd forgotten they were supposed to come from the same place." She paused. You came to one dinner, and you answered every question like you meant it. You didn't perform. You didn't manage anything. You just sat at my mother's table and were exactly who you were. And it was so unfamiliar that I didn't recognize it at first. She felt her voice shift slightly. It took me a while to understand that what I was watching was just someone being honest, that I'd gotten so used to the gap between the performance and the reality that I didn't know what it looked like when they were the same. She looked at him. You taught me that by example, not by telling me. You never told me what to do or how to be or what I needed to change. You just kept being exactly who you were, and you trusted me to figure out the rest. She stopped. I want to be clear. That is not a small thing. That is the whole thing. That is everything. She folded the paper. I choose you. Not the version of you that I needed when I was desperate. Not the version of you that solved a problem on a bad night. The real one. The one who keeps voicemails and makes soup when people come over and lets a 6-year-old tell him he's taking too long and doesn't argue because she's not wrong. Her voice was unsteady now. She let it be unsteady. I choose the tired version of you and the careful version and the version that's learning to laugh more. I choose all of it. I am not going anywhere. She used the tissue. Lily used one too, though she would later deny this in terms that were unconvincing. In the third row, Margaret Bennett held Robert Bennett's hand and looked at her daughter with the expression of a woman who had spent 30 years worrying and had finally, clearly, been given permission to put it down. The reception was loud and warm and went 3 hours longer than planned, which was the best possible outcome for a wedding reception. Lily danced with everyone willing to dance with her, which was most people, and at some point ended up on her grandfather Robert's shoulders, which was not something Robert Bennett did in public, and yet apparently did now. Kara's new baby slept through the entire reception in a carrier on Daniel's chest, which Daniel reported with the specific wonder of a person who has discovered a small miracle. Mrs. Paulson danced with the caterer. The mountain watched from the distance, unmoved, which was the correct response from a mountain. At some point in the evening, Sophie found herself standing at the edge of the meadow with a glass of wine she'd been meaning to drink for an hour, watching the lights strung between the trees and the people moving under them. And Damien came and stood beside her in the way he'd been doing since December, close enough to feel, present enough to matter, not requiring anything from the moment except to be in it. You okay? He said. I'm perfect, she said, and then immediately, don't say anything about that. I wasn't going to. You had a look. I was just noting that you said a word you don't usually. Damien. Okay. She leaned against him. He put his arm around her. They stood at the edge of the meadow and watched their wedding reception from 10 feet outside it, the way they'd been watching things from slight angles their whole lives. Not quite inside, not quite outside, the particular position of people who had learned to manage on the margins and were still, even now, slightly surprised to find themselves at the center of something. Your father danced, Damien said. I know. I cried about it privately. With Daniel? With your daughter, actually. We had a moment behind the dessert table. He looked at her. What kind of moment? She told me she was glad I came to the diner that night. Sophie paused. Then she said she was glad I was bad at lying because if I hadn't been so obvious about the fake husband thing, you never would have agreed to come to dinner. Damien was quiet for a second. She said that? Verbatim. She's been workshopping the narrative. He exhaled through his nose. She's been workshopping the narrative since February. She told me. Sophie looked up at him. She also said, and I want you to know I cried about this one too, at the dessert table, which was inconvenient. She said that you laugh different now than you did at the beginning of the year. She said she knows because she's been listening. Damien's jaw tightened slightly, the way it did when something landed harder than he'd prepared for. He looked at the lights in the trees for a moment. She's right, he said after a while. Just that. Sophie put her hand against his chest, felt the solid reality of him, the warmth and the heartbeat and the specific weight of a person who was actually there, not performed or imagined or invented. She'd invented a husband once, out of shame and desperation, and given him a name and a profession and a quality of attention she'd needed and didn't know how to ask for. What she had instead, the real version, The imperfect version, the man who prepared soup for guests without announcing it, was special and put her favorite color in his kitchen without fully noticing, was better in every way that mattered. Not because he was without difficulty. He was difficult in specific ways. He was slow to say things out loud. He processed everything internally for longer than was comfortable. He had 3 years' worth of walls that came up in unfamiliar situations, and he could not be rushed on anything he'd decided to be thorough about. But he was real. He was exactly who he was, all the time, and she'd come to understand that this plain, consistent reality was the thing she'd been looking for inside every invented version of every relationship she'd failed to sustain. Not perfection, not a presentation, just a person who was actually there. She'd had to lie her way to the truth. She wasn't proud of that, but she'd stopped being ashamed of it, which was a different and harder thing. Later that night, after the guests had gone and Lily had been carried inside asleep in her silver dress with autumn flowers still in her hair, Sophie sat on the porch steps in the dark while Damien locked up the house. The meadow was quiet. Someone had forgotten a string of lights still plugged in, and they gave the empty space a warm, low glow that would have looked staged if it had been planned, but was real because it wasn't. She thought about the parking lot in December, the 6% battery and the dead heater and the way the snow came sideways. She thought about walking into the diner and saying to a stranger's back, "I need a husband." She thought about what Damien had said in the diner that first night, after she'd explained the whole mess and waited for him to find the exit. "I said I would. Not I'll do my best or let's see how it goes, just I said I would." She thought that was maybe the thing she should have identified as the whole story right there, that a person's reliability was in the ratio between what they said and what they did, and that this particular man had a ratio of 1 to 1, and she'd recognized it without being able to name it, and had spent 5 months waiting for it to reveal itself as an exception rather than a rule. It hadn't. People like that existed. She hadn't believed they did. Not for her, not in her particular life. But they did. And the only extraordinary thing required to find one was the specific misfortune of a snowstorm and a dead battery and a family dinner and the sentence she'd nearly been too embarrassed to say out loud to a stranger in a diner. Desperation had excellent timing, occasionally. The screen door opened behind her and Damien came out and sat down on the step beside her. Their shoulders touched. The lights in the meadow buzzed softly. "Lily's out," he said. She held on for a long time. She wanted to make sure everything was actually fine before she went to sleep. He said it without irony. "She's been doing that since she was 3. She checks." Sophie thought about a 2-year-old learning to check. Learning to scan the room and confirm that the things she needed were still there before she let herself rest. The thing that had made her so perceptive, so watchful, so capable of noticing the difference in her father's laugh. It had come from somewhere, from the same place all coping came from, the need to feel safe enough to close your eyes. "She doesn't have to check anymore," Sophie said. "No," Damien said. "I know." Sophie looked at the forgotten lights. "I want her to know that," she said. "Not just because we told her, because she actually feels it." "She will," he said. "It takes time, but she will." They sat in the comfortable silence they'd built over 9 months of Sundays and Wednesdays and dinner tables and porch evenings, the kind of silence that wasn't empty but full of the ordinary shared life that was the actual substance of love, the part nobody told you about because it wasn't dramatic enough to describe. Sophie thought about what she'd said in her vows, the part about wanting things being the same as being afraid to lose them. She'd been afraid to lose this. From the beginning, from the first Sunday evening phone call, she'd been holding it with the careful hands of someone who expected to be asked to give it back. She wasn't holding it carefully anymore. She was just holding it, the way you held things you decided were yours, present and settled and not afraid. "I have something to tell you," she said. He looked at her. "I called the gift shop," she said. "The one I used to work at. They're looking for someone to manage their account." She paused. "I told them I was interested, not the weekend shift, the actual books." He was quiet for a moment. "When did this happen?" "Tuesday. I was going to tell you, but I wanted to confirm it was real first." She looked at her hands. "It's a small account. I'm not quitting the grill, not yet, but it's a step toward the thing I actually want to be doing. Bookkeeping, he said. Numbers make sense to me, she said. People are a lot, but numbers do what they're supposed to do. She paused. I think I want to build something small, not huge, just mine. He nodded, slowly, like he was thinking past the surface of it. You should, he said. You've been underusing that part of yourself for a while. I know. She looked at the lights. I needed the 3 jobs when I needed them. They kept me going. But I don't need to survive the same way anymore. She said it carefully, not because she was worried about what it meant, but because she wanted to say it right. I want to build something. That's different from surviving. Yeah, he said, it is. She looked at him. You didn't say I could use your accountants or your network or anything like that. You didn't ask. I noticed. He looked back. If you ask, I'll answer, but you didn't ask. She thought about what she'd told Kara in March, in her kitchen with her hands folded on the table. He doesn't fix things I don't ask him to fix. She'd said it like a curiosity then, something she was still cataloging. She understood it now as the most considered form of respect she'd ever been given by a person who could have done otherwise. Thank you, she said, for that. In general. He picked up her hand, turned it over in his, the specific, unhurried way he had of holding things he valued. You worked out every hard thing yourself, he said. Your family, your mother, the truth, the jobs. You worked all of it out. He paused. I wasn't going to get in the way of that. She leaned against his shoulder, felt the familiar, solid weight of him. Gerald needs to be repotted, she said. He's getting too big for the terracotta. We can do it Sunday. Lily's going to want to help. She's going to want to supervise, he said. Same thing. Not remotely the same thing. They sat with the mountain in the distance and the lights in the meadow and the quiet house behind them and the sleeping 6-year-old in silver with flowers in her hair, and Sophie thought about what Lily had drawn in brown and silver crayon on an afternoon in December and taped to the moonhouse plans, the afternoon sun in the corner, the 2 figures in the ballroom, the large, uneven letters. Finally. Lily had meant finally, but Sophie thought maybe the misspelling had been its own small truth, because what they had wasn't the dramatic finally of a climax, the triumphant resolution she'd been sold as the shape of a love story. It was finally, carefully, in small, accumulated decisions, in soup and Sunday evenings and the weight of a hand on an elbow at a door, in 47 voicemails kept because someone understood, without knowing they were understanding it, that you didn't delete the things that mattered, in a 6-year-old holding a stranger's hand through an icy patch and deciding not to let go. It was what happened when 2 people who had both learned to survive chose, instead, to stay. Sophie had asked a stranger for 1 night. He'd given her the rest. She was keeping it. In the window of the house behind them, on the sill where the afternoon light would find it in the morning, Gerald the cactus stood in his new pot, larger than the terracotta one with the chipped rim, given to him by a 6-year-old who had picked it herself from a shop on Main Street because it was silver and silver was important. He was doing fine. He had always been doing fine. He was just, like most things worth anything, better with somewhere permanent to belong.